That might help get a better recording. Good to see everyone. I'm always surprised by how fast time just goes. It seems like we're just here, but of course it's already May. This is our first meeting of 2024. So we can get right to the business that we have at hand, which is we've got a good slate, I think, of topics to talk about over the next couple of days. And some revisiting that we are well aware of, such as some sales tax issues. We're doing something a little unique this year, and which I think everybody on the committee is excited about. Sort of a cultural preservation and cultural education undertaking for those of us on the committee. And I always think that that sort of outreach for the legislature and is a good undertaking. So that's kind of a new thing. Of course, we'll discuss education, some solid waste management, which I know is a big topic for community members here on the reservation. So with all that, we'll get started, but something, of course, that we won't skip over, very important, is for everybody to have an opportunity to introduce themselves. So we recognize everybody that is here from both the Northern Arapaho tribe and the Eastern Shoshone tribe and any other community members that are here and are interested. So we'll get to that. We will start out. We will do we'll do roll call, and then I'll call up if people want to come up here and do an introduction, we can do that, or we can do it from the, seated from the audience, whichever you prefer. So with that, would you call roll, please?
Senator Barlow.
Right.
Senator Case. Representative Chestick.
Here.
Representative Penn.
Here.
Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Present.
Co-Chairwoman Oakley.
Here.
All are present, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I see representatives and the chairman of Eastern Shoshone Business Council. Do you want to come up, Chairman? And if anybody else from the Eastern Shoshone, either Business Council or tribe, wants to introduce themselves, I see some others coming up. Go ahead, Mr. Large. If it turns green, give us 1 second.
A green
Chairman.
light, huh?
Okay.
Is it working now?
It is.
Oh, thank you very much for having us present today. There's some important issues that relate to us, and one of them is on the rock art. I wish I'd have seen that 50, 60 years ago, before all this damage has been done. But thank you for considering it today. And I just want to introduce myself. My name is John St. Clair. I'm the chairman of the Shoshone Business Council, and I've been on the council for almost 5 years.
Thank you, Chairman St. Clair. I appreciate that. I agree that perhaps it's something we all should have looked at, some of the preservation of important art and history. And I can tell you from emails received from this committee and stuff, there's just a lot of interest in that. So we can begin our educational journey and hopefully do something. And if there's something that can be done, we can work towards that. So I appreciate that. Go ahead, Councilman.
Good morning. My name is Waylon Large. This is going to be my first time elected to the council, but this is will be my second year. And we're voted in for 4 years, so I'm on for another 2. I'm honored to be here, and I am all support of what the tribe is endeavors on with the petroglyphs and other things, issues with our solid waste, education of our Indian students here within Wyoming, and then also the other things that involve the tribe. But I'm glad to be here and to listen in and participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Large. I know you also have been an active leader and community member on the Wind River Reservation for a long time. Do you want to tell the committee what where you're employed?
Oh, okay. I'm employed with the Eastern Shoshone Business Council. I also serve on the District 21 School Board. I'm going on, I think, my second term. Also, I was a very active member in our tribal committee, the Eastern Shoshone Entertainment Committee. I sat on that for numerous appointments, and that was to conduct all the tribal activities amongst our tribe, such as tribal dances, feasts, get-togethers that involve the community. So I've been on that for a long time, so I'm very familiar with the community, and everybody knows me in the community. And so, and I am very participant in the powwow, any activity that traditionally I'm involved in. I do support the kids, that's one thing, and also is our language. I'm kind of one of the youngest ones that can speak somewhat Shoshone, but it's sad that we do have the programs in the school to promote the Eastern Shoshone language, but to me, it needs to be more. I would like to see an immersion like I respect the Northern Arapaho tribe has an immersion program in Arapaho, Wyoming, and it focuses on the little ones because that's their first key to hear the language, and it's easy for them to pick it up. Where the other ones, it takes time, and as the languages, we come from the Aztec, where the roll of the tongue, our language is very vast. It stretches all the way from California to our last sister tribe in Oklahoma, the Comanche, the show bands, the Goshus, the Paiutes. But that's one thing I really like to promote is the language, and I like to speak it in public because they need to hear it. And elder said, if you don't use it, you'll be the one that's the reason to lose it. So I'm really proactive on that. But other than that, I'm involved in a little bit of everything. So, and I enjoy it. It keeps me busy. But thank you, Amber.
Thank you, Councilman Large. Appreciate that. We went and visited schools last time we were here, and I think a lot of us were really struck by the improvement and increase in the language programs. And that was just something that was I think really interesting and fascinating for us. So we'll partner, do what we can, I guess, as a state to support that, because that seems like a really important avenue. All right. Go ahead, Chairman. No. Done. Thank you. And Northern Arapaho Business Council. See Chairman Goggles. Good morning, Chairman, Councilman. If you guys will go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members. It's good to see you guys, and I'm glad you all made it. It's I looked over the agenda, and there were some things that I'm familiar with a little bit here and there. So I was able to follow up, and just like my grandpa had mentioned about the rock art, from being a game warden at one time, that was one thing that I really, I guess it was being presented to me with the things that I saw. And, once I developed an eye for that, I started seeing them everywhere. And so, but they're in such a sensitive areas, I guess, that, we also have to bring awareness, but then be able to preserve, because from my young knowledge of that, it's not ours, it's not Arapaho's, but it's from like other people, and they deserve those that art to be preserved. And but along with that, pass along to the co-chairman here.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Madam Co-Chairs and distinguished members of the Tribal Select. For those who don't know me, my name is Lee Spoonhunter. I currently serve as the co-chairman of Northern Arapaho Tribe. I've been on the council for 8 years in my final term. I am very excited that we are talking about education tomorrow. K through 12 and higher education. I serve as the president of our Sky People Higher Education Committee. And education's been near and dear to my heart, and it was one of the reasons why I ran for tribal council back in 2016. So with that, I'm just happy to be here and look forward to all of the dialogue that we're going to have this next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Go
Good
ahead.
morning, good morning, Tribal Select and Madam Co-Chairs. My name is Keenan Grosbeck, Northern Arapaho Business Councilman, and I'm happy to be here this morning. And I looked over the agenda, and I'm the solid waste guy for the Northern Arapaho, and it's kind of big task, get overwhelmed, but we're working on it, and I think we're getting to the point there that we're gonna be able to start tackling this problem head on, and the main thing is funding. We need funding, so. But that's what I've been working on, and I'm glad to be here and get this agenda going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Is anything further from you, gentlemen? Thank you for being here, Councilman. And I see, of course, tribal liaison, but is there anybody else? You don't have to be,
Have everybody stand.
do you want to do like everybody in the room? Do you want to introduce yourself, Scotty?
Scotty Rapp, I currently work for Senator Loomis.
Thank you. Go ahead. Anybody else in the room? Is there anybody else in that?
I think we just make.
In the- and then-
Everybody.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
Brian.
pointing at people and we're not getting anywhere.
Brian, that's for you.
Okay, in the back there,
I'm Stephen McKnight with Wyoming DBS.
perfect. Go ahead.
Good morning, Russell Schiffern from the Acme Regional.
Okay, and I think we're good back there. Okay, Sergio?
Morning, Sergio Maldonado, the Arapaho Tribe Education Director.
Okay. Go ahead, that row.
Wendy Whitehead, Tribal Conservation Director, Wyoming.
Carl Fisher, Executive Director, Wyoming.
Sarah Squires, Wyoming.
Okay.
Good morning, Lindy Lynn with Senator Lamas's office. Anita Roman, Tribal Liaison for the Northern Arapaho Tribe under Governor Mark Gordon.
Okay,
Joe Wentworth, Special Counsel, Tribal Relations, Policy Advisor to the Governor.
And James Sarles, Tribal Liaison to the Eastern Shoshone Tribe out of Governor Mark Gordon's office. Thank you.
great. Thank you. And then I think next we will actually have the tribal liaisons in the governor's office come up and introduce yourself. Tell us what you've been working on.
Should we introduce ourselves?
We can.
Well, some people may not know.
Yeah, I don't have. So, thank you all for being here. Upon Senator Case's request, we will, introduce ourselves here on the committee. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Penn, House District 33. So this here is my district.
Hi, I'm Ken Chestick. I'm House District 13 from the city of Laramie.
Amber Oakley, representative for House District 55, which is Riverton.
Daffy Ellis, Senate District 8 in Laramie County.
Cale Case, Senate District 25, and this is my district too. Glad to be here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Barlow. I represent Senate District 23, which is part of Gillette and Southern Campbell County. Thank you for a beautiful morning. I saw the entire morning from 3 o'clock on. I'm glad I ended up here safely. Thank you.
And perhaps the most important people in the room for keeping us all going. Go ahead, Ms. Ship. Okay, good. Mr. Wentland and everyone, go ahead and introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman Oakley, members of the Select Committee. Again, Kit Wentland, Special Counsel, Tribal Relations Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. We'll just give you a brief overview of intertribal efforts that we've been working on since our last meeting. And the first two, I'll go over to some further MMIP efforts. There's some updates that James and Anita have as well as some other things. And then a quick note on feral horses. First is under our MMIP efforts. I know you're going to hear from Director Chambers a lot on the task force efforts there. One other thing that we're still working on that we've finally, I think, are going to get around to, hopefully now that session is toned down and we've got a little more breathing room, is trying to find ways to advocate for the Badges Act in Congress or something similar. The committee has heard before about the need for increased BIA law enforcement presence and hiring speeds. And that's one act that at least tries to get information about that, test some pilot approaches for increasing background checks for those hiring processes for BIA law enforcement officers. Again, it's something that's been stalled in Congress for a couple of years, so it's probably a heavy lift, but it's one thing we're trying to look at, whether it's joint letters or other forms of support or lobbying to get moving. And then on the Feral Horses Avenue, under the governor's budget request, we were granted more money to continue those efforts in conjunction with Tribal Fish and Game. Not much to update other than that. Those discussions are ongoing, and we're just in the process of figuring out what amounts of money does Tribal Fish and Game want, what timing, and how would that work this biennium. We have a good relationship with both councils on that topic, as well as Director Art Lawson. So unless there are any questions, I can turn it over to Anita, and then James can follow up and afterwards.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Wentland. Go ahead, Ms. Roman.
Oh, Madam Chair. Kit, I apologize. I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe for our next hearing, if you don't have the answers right now, in the recent years, we've passed bills that would authorize the tribes to apply for certain funding streams from the Business Council to participate in like weed and pest programs and just brucellosis programs. Maybe for our next hearing, if you don't have the answers, we could just get an update to see if any entities have applied for, or utilized those funds from the reservation.
Go ahead, Mr. Wentland.
Thank you, Chairwoman Oakley. Chairwoman Ellis, of course, I unfortunately don't have that information off the top of my head, but I do remember those programs, and I can check in with Director True and Director Miyamoto on utilization.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Roman.
Good morning, Chairwoman Oakley, Select Tribal. I always freeze. I apologize. So starting off strong, it's been super busy actually since the legislative session. So with that being said, we're working on more MMIP issues. So as you may have known, in March, we had a CATE training, which is a child abduction tabletop exercise. And that was a follow-up from the Ashanti Alert trainings that the Northern Arapaho Business Council had asked that we put on for our jurisdictions as well as our community members so they could understand what is the Ashanti Alert. And then from there, we started talking about community response to child abduction in our community and brought around the jurisdictions. There was a few that were not able to make it due to turnover and, just being really busy. So we're going to try to have another one, but it was so well turned out. Honestly, we had the FBI there, we had the U.S. Marshals there. It was just, and the Lander PD, as well as, DFS director was there, as well as his team, to just kind of start thinking about what is our response when someone goes missing. And from there, we'll figure out what the next training should be. we had a quarterly in-person meeting with the governor and the Northern Arapahoe Business Council last Friday, and it was awesome. It was just really good. I just got to say that it was amazing to watch frank and honest conversation happen between both the governor and the council. I mean, they were just very open about discussion. And where they meet on major issues, right? What they agree on and what they might not agree on. It was just really good to see. It was my first in-person meeting too, to kind of help facilitate and chill out, because I really like to run everything. So I had to learn to shut up. And then the grant summit. So James and I attended the grant writing summit hosted by the state and federal funders in early April. So Cynthia Lummis's office, as well as Governor Mark Gordon and Barrasso, and it was really awesome. It was incredibly helpful. And so I've already been in talks with the council as well as state staff members about how we can better work with the tribal entities on accessing federal funding. So, meeting with them, seeing what that looks like. And that's actually been really time intensive. So we'll see how that goes.
Thank you, Ms. Roman. Mr. Soros?
Good morning, Madam Chair, Honorable Tribal Select. I'm James Sarles, Tribal Liaison to the Eastern Shoshone Tribe. I have a few updates here. One for the MMIP, to further trainings in June and July, August timeframes. Probably in the first part of June, maybe mid-June, we're going to have a conference call with our contractor that's been putting on the CATE training. She will be try to get a conference call with a lot of the law enforcement, so we can hit this one more time and don't miss anybody, as well as our DFS, DVS, whoever, a lot of them that are involved in with children. Some different programs, very successful last time. But we want to focus a little bit more on the law enforcement. They're the ones that trigger the alerts. So hopefully that'll work out, and then we'll get that going again. We'll give an update. Probably send you guys out an update on it when it's going to happen again. The exact dates. And of course, on the 5th, this coming Sunday, is the MMIP walk in Riverton, and that should go well. It's always a lot of participation in that as well. Wear red if you can. And then on the May 17th will be the MMIP task force, and that'll be at the Shoshone Rose Casino here. Another one, of course, as you mentioned, quarterly in-person meeting with the governor and the Eastern Shoshone Business Council went very well. I know the governor would like to get out here more often in person, so it was seemed to go over very well. Both sides had some things that they expressed what their interests were and what the obstacles that they face. So it's moving forward. I think. I think some will just get better over time as we move forward. As Anita had mentioned earlier, that we had the grant summit funding in CWC, and that was again another very big thing. I never knew what any of that stuff entailed, but there is funding opportunities through the state that and also federal partners. There was a special session just at the Wind River Casino for the tribes and federal partners, and that went. There was a lot of information was exchanged, a lot of cards exchanged, and it's so hopefully moving forward we can get. A lot of that funding on track, because some of it we've probably never experienced before. So in a lot of I guess a lot of the minds that actually turn the wheels at processing the grants, that they can be reached out to. They're available if you have trouble writing one up, or stumble, there is help available, which I personally never knew that could happen. So look forward to a lot more of that. And with that, if you have any questions, Oh, yeah, I have one more thing as well, is that, of course, part of this summit is, of course, finding grants, and one of the big things with the tribes is solid waste. So in the EPA will, there's some grants available, funding, they're gonna be, gonna have a summit on that here in a couple weeks, so we'll, hopefully some good will come out of that as well. We'll have the tribes, the state will be there, the county, a lot of stakeholders that are involved in solid waste, so we're looking for some good things to come out of that.
Great, thank you. Committee questions for the tribal liaisons or the governor's office? Co-chairman Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment. Years ago, I served on this task force. It was a national task force, and our mission was to write a report about public safety with some recommendations. And so we traveled to all 12 Bureau of Indian Affairs regions. And one thing we heard consistently was Congress passes acts, funds programs, but they're all grant-based. And so repeatedly, tribes would express concern that only, tribes that have financial resources are the ones that can hire experienced grant writers and have people that monitor grant applications and deadlines, but it's the tribes that struggle financially, that don't have those experienced grant writers, that can't stay on top of all the grants available. And so I just want to thank you for attending that, because I think it's really important. And then also express our appreciation to the congressional delegation for supporting that, because there's a lot of federal money out there, but it takes humans to see those opportunities and write the grants and make it all work. So thank you. I know that's a big issue out there.
Chairwoman, thank you for that.
Thank you, Co-chairman Ellis. Go ahead, Ms. Roman.
Sorry, I was really excited on that comment that you had indicated, because one of the biggest issues with federal funding is that it's on a reimbursement basis. And unless you do have the resources available for that revolving fund, it's really hard to actually access these funds. So it was really exciting to kind of start having those discussions with our federal funders, and they're understanding that, hey, oh, you want 50 million, but you still have to have 10 million available to kind of start the project. And so, kind of understanding under-resourced communities. It was awesome.
Great, good discussion. Further questions, comments? All right, go ahead, Mr. Whitland.
Thank you, Chairwoman Oakley. I just wanted to say too, I know our federal delegation helped a lot with that grant writing summit, especially Senator Lummis's office. So I know those folks are in the room here. Just wanted to say a big thank you to them as well for coordination and help on that.
Go ahead, Co-chair.
Madam Co-chair, Mr. Wetland, the Badges Act, that's something that I think we've written letters of support on before in the past. Would a letter from our committee be helpful in your advocacy that you're talking about in the governor's office?
Mr. Whitland.
Chairwoman Oakley, Chairwoman Ellis, yes, I think it would be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Final chance here. All right, thank you. Thank you all. And so before we close this, it would be, so there's any just general public comment. Go ahead, Mr. Ratliff, or come on up.
Thank you, Chairman.
Go ahead.
And members of the committee. One of the things that seemed glowingly clear, Scotty Ratliff from
Thank you.
Senator Loomis's office. One of the things that was glowingly clear at the funding summit, not just for the reservation, but for the state, is that we do not have projects that are shovel ready. And almost without exception, the funding people said that's where the money's going. And just as a possible solution to that, years ago, under the Wyoming Business Council, they had a community assessment wing. And my understanding that they gave that up and it went to the University of Wyoming. I don't know if that's been encouraged to be made available to communities, but I think if we're either the reservation or the state of Wyoming really needs to put some energy into how do we get ready, because anyone that attended that summit, there's literally billions of dollars and it's going to those that are ready for it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratliff. Questions for Mr. Ratliff? He's getting out anyway. I know we've had some other people join the room, not to put anybody on the spot. Do we want to have a few more introductions while we're still kind of in introduction territory? Yeah, I see Councilwoman, I see Vice Chairman Ute. Go ahead. Do you want to introduce yourself? You don't have to, putting you on the spot. Thank you, Councilwoman. Would you like to introduce yourself, Vice Chairman? Thank you, Vice Chairman. And last one there, would you go? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Okay, do we have online?
Yes, we have Director Chambers online regarding MMIP. So she's ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, perfect. If you would go ahead and queue up Director Chambers. I see you up there. Can you hear us? If you can, go ahead.
I can hear
introduce
you.
yourself.
Can you hear me? Hear me?
We can. So go ahead and proceed with testimony, Director.
All right, thank you. My name is Kara Chambers, and I am the Director of the Division of Victim Services within the Attorney General's office. And I am also honored to chair Governor Gordon's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Task Force. So with that, you've heard a lot of updates. I don't want to overstate, but wanted to let you know of three big events that are going on the reservation. Beginning with Sunday, May 5th, there will be an MMIP march in Riverton. And that is, of course, to acknowledge National Awareness Day for Missing and Murdered Native Women and Girls. And in fact, Governor Gordon has signed a proclamation declaring May 5th as National MMIP Awareness Day in Wyoming. And I believe that will be read at the event on Sunday. If you want more information on that, you can look at MMIP Wind River, and that's all one word, .org. And so I wanted to put a plug in for that because that is a big day that's coming up on Sunday. Beyond that, I'm sure you've heard updates or reference in the past to a big FBI initiative that is going on the Wind River currently, where they are holding open sessions for families with potential long-term open cases, aka cold cases. And that is occurring Wednesday, May 8th at the Wind River Casino. I'm sorry, I don't have times, but I believe it's a fairly open period of time. I'm sure you can find more info on that, but I did want to put a plug in for that as well. And then as Liaison Sorrells mentioned, we have Friday, May 17th, we have the next MMIP task force meeting. So that will be at Shoshone Rose. It begins at 9 a.m. It's open to all. We will probably have it for about an hour and a half. And at that, kind of stepping on what I'd like to update the committee is I think that will be when we gather some ideas. Recently, Commander Cox with DCI, who is here with me virtually today, as well as DCI Director Scott Williams. But Commander Cox and I recently attended the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Conference, where we really saw a lot of good content and maybe have potentially some legislative pieces that other states are doing when it comes to initiatives with missing people, in particular, an initiative called Patricia's Law, that I will have more info for you once I am able to bring this to the task force, because of course, we would present that to you on behalf of the task force. So with that, I know you are doing an amazing job of keeping on time, and I don't want to get in the way of that. So with that, I would turn it over to my virtual colleague. Well, he's actual colleague, but he's virtually here with me, Commander Ryan Cox with DCI. And thank you. And I would stand, of course, for any questions.
Thank you, Director. Questions for Director Chambers? All right, thank you. And go ahead and we will call in Commander Cox if he's handy? I can't see anybody. There we go. Go ahead, Commander, introduce yourself and then proceed with testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Ryan Cox. I'm a commander with the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, and I'm bringing you just a couple quick updates. First, although not specifically related to this committee, I want to touch on the cold case database, House Bill 29. As most people know, that was a database that is going to be launched to collect cold case homicides and sexual assaults across the state. And our update is that we've evaluated different databases, and after evaluation, we feel that we can implement an internal database that meets all our needs. And it'll be similar to what the missing person database looks like. That's currently on the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation webpage. We've had conversations with law enforcement around the state about the database. We're continuing to gather fields of information that we want to collect and disseminate within that database. We're additionally working with WASCOPs on those. WASCOP, Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, to collect those fields and what fields need to be collected. We're also working on the rules that will be promulgated in reference to the database. And it's our belief that as agencies go through their cold cases, that will instigate them to look at forensic genetic genealogy, which brings me to the topic that's more specific to this committee. That was House Bill 58. That is a $150,000 grant that DCI will administer for agencies across Wyoming to request that funds to complete forensic genetic genealogy, which I think we've all discussed and everybody has a good understanding on, but by all means, if not, I'll be happy to try to answer those questions. Or we also have our lab director, Scott McWilliams, that will be virtually here also. And he absolutely could answer those questions much better than I. But in that reference, the grant, we have began the creation of the application for a reimbursement grant to those local agencies. What that looks like is it will be a continuously open grant that agencies can apply for at any time. We are looking at a board to review those grants, and we're still working on what that looks like, but we'll have updates on that in the future. Once the application is approved, we perceive that they'll be able to spend that money quickly and know how much money that they have been awarded that they can later submit for reimbursement. We'll also be gathering the results. What was the resolution to their request to a lab to do forensic genetic genealogy. And that is my update, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Commander Cox. I believe that Representative Chestic has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Commander Cox. Thank you for your update. As you probably remember, I also serve on the Judiciary Committee, and the cold case database was one of the projects of the Judiciary Committee. I recall from that hearing that one of the advantages of doing this cold case database would be the ability to share data with other states and to be able to track cases across state lines, because a lot of these cases might involve cross-state things. So doing your database internally, will you be able to share data with other states and take advantage of the multi-state feature of having a database like this?
Thank you,
Commander
Chairman.
Cox.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. That is a great question, and I should clarify. When I say it's an internal database, that means actually the creation of the database, where we evaluated commercially available databases and looked at their abilities versus what we could do with an internally created database. which is where we're leaning towards, strongly leaning towards at this point. And as with our missing persons database that is displayed on our webpage, it will have that same functionality where the public and other law enforcement would be able to view the database, conduct inquiries and filters of that database, with the idea, obviously, that yes, a database that's just withheld within our facility is not going to be nearly as productive as a database that we can share externally with the public, and even at a greater extent share with law enforcement.
Follow up. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Chairman. Commander Cox, you said that this database would allow people, families and whatnot to get on and do some searches. Is this something that would make it more simple for people to submit information? Is that going to be a component of the database?
Commander Cox.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yes, we do believe that we will implement some sort of integrate our tip system within that database, or with a link that is directly on the same web page, essentially, as that database. And obviously, that is the idea behind this. I mean, we want to gather more public input. Maybe it sparks something that they haven't thought of for many years, and we can facilitate receiving those tips and then getting that information back to the originating agency or the investigating agency. As this is not just a database for DCI cases, this is a database for all Wyoming law enforcement.
Thank you, Commander. Further questions?
A few.
Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With your internal database, you touched on what fields might be appropriate. Kind of, if you could just kind of give us a sense of what you're discussing and what you think might be on the table, what you're like, maybe that's a field that we don't need, just so we can understand that better. So that's my first part of my question. The second part is on the reimbursement of the FGG grants that you're working on. I'm a little concerned that if we do it on a reimbursement basis, it might be a barrier for law enforcement agencies to have kind of that cash flow to, available to get reimbursed. So I was wondering if that's set in stone, or if you're concerned about that being a barrier, if law enforcement agencies have expressed that being maybe a barrier to utilizing those funds.
Commander Cox.
Thank you, Co-Chair. As on your first topic, so the fields that we are evaluating are extensive. So to go through them all would take a good amount of time. In fact, I believe right now we're hovering around about 100 fields of information that we'll be collecting. And not all those will be displayed to the public. We do have some state statutes as this is also collecting information about sexual assaults. And there are specific state statutes that prohibit us from sharing that information. And then as far as the information pertaining to like a homicide case, more fields can be displayed with that. But again, some of those are the discussions that we're having with other law enforcement as to what information can we share amongst law enforcement that's beneficial to tie cases together, but also protect the integrity of the case and those things that investigators want to hold back as they feel that's vital to solving the case when they're interviewing suspects. Onto the reimbursement portion or aspect of the grant, that is not set in stone. It is a discussion that we will continue to have with law enforcement. At this time, we haven't had any concerns presented to us by law enforcement. I do want to absolutely understand where that might come from, that they maybe cannot generate those funds to get the work done and then us reimburse it. So that, again, that's still a topic for discussion amongst us internally and a decision that we need to make. And go with the best sound decision as to why we would do a reimbursement versus an upfront grant and grant them the money. Part of that problem being is sometimes the figures might change depending on the work that needs to get done, is what we've seen. So they sometimes give a span. It could cost between, to say maybe $8,000 to $10,000 to complete this lab work, but they don't know until they walk that through the process and get to the point of whether they need to do further testing or not. And potentially Deputy Director Scott McWilliams could add more to that, because that's the technical aspects of what's going on in the laboratory.
Thank you, Commander. Follow-up, Co-Chair?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say I will do some digging, because I know other states have tackled this. And, maybe there's something to be learned about how they're just moving the money around, that we could copy or just look at as you're setting that program up. So thank you for all your hard work. And Madam Chair, along those lines, I can tell you that when we started talking about missing people years ago, the information available on DCI's website was kind of there, but over the years, you guys have done a really good job of providing more information to the public. I think things are moving on a really good track, and that just takes work. And, it's one thing for us to sit, as legislators and ask for these things, but for you on the ground to make it happen. Thank you for doing all that work.
Very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Further questions for the Commander? Okay, we will move on. Is Deputy Director McWilliams there also? Okay, yes. So we'll call in Deputy Director McWilliams.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Commander. Go ahead, Mr. McWilliams, Deputy Director, introduce yourself and proceed.
Good morning. I apologize if I have a bad internet connection here. I hate to be that guy, but I'm in a hotel in Birmingham this morning. Co-chairs Ellis and Oakley, good morning, members of the committee. My name's Scott McWilliams. I'm the Deputy Director at DCI in charge of the Crime Lab, informally known as the Crime Lab Director. And I have a background in DNA analysis. I've worked with some forensic investigative genetic genealogy cases in the past, and I don't have a lot to add to what Commander Cox said, but I stand here if you have any more specific questions about the technology or the process we're looking forward to working with.
Thank you, Deputy Director. I would like to do, I guess, a little follow-up on Co-Chairwoman Ellis's questions. In your experience working with the different law enforcement agencies around the state, do you see it being cost prohibitive? I mean, it seemed like this $8,000 to $10,000 isn't extremely high, it's kind of an attainable goal, maybe smaller agencies. Anyway, so I'm just thinking through that, and I know you have a lot of experience with working with agencies throughout the state. So if you had any thoughts on that as far as putting the cost of doing that up front.
Sure. So the cost that can go up to $10,000, as you guys have discussed, I don't think it's unreasonable for the amount of technology that's out there. And there's a lot of research that's required, a lot of human hours once you've done the lab work to find those connections within a family tree. And so it does come out to be pricey, but given the $150,000 that the state has given toward this project, I believe that because there's a very small subset of cases that actually would qualify for this, I think it's a reasonable place to start. And I think that it'll divide out appropriately and help some of our major cases that need help. This isn't a technology that we can use on every case. Forensic investigative genetic genealogy requires quite a bit of DNA, relatively speaking. It requires good DNA that's not super degraded and hasn't been chewed up by microbes in sunlight. So we need the quality DNA, we need enough DNA, and we need most of the sample of DNA to be from a perpetrator of your crime or from your unidentified human remains. And that's a little more straightforward on that second part. But given the types of cases, I think that even though it's very expensive per case, I think that because there will only be a few cases that qualify for this over time, it's not unreasonable.
Thank you, Director McWilliams. Questions for him committee? All right. Thank you for being here from Alabama, and we heard you loud and clear. So all went well. So thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have anybody else that is planning on appearing online?
Not for this topic, Madam Chair.
Okay. So, I guess this is kind of last call public comment, or we're kind of still in the general introduction or update on efforts, kind of a preliminary. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on that?
Madam Chairwoman.
Yes, Senator Case.
Madam Chairwoman, I sent the committee a article from the online version of the Riverton Ranger. It was written by Sarah Squires, who's here. She's the managing editor for the Journal, or Journal Ranger. And it talked about the MMIP database and the data that's become available now. And what struck me, there was also a print version of the article that was a little different, but what struck me about the article I sent you is it called attention to 10 juveniles that have gone missing in the past 6 months. Actually, it's actually less than that. Most of them are in like March and February. 10. And there seem to be connections between them. I'm just astounded. And in the introduction to the article, and she's here, she could speak for herself, it talked about how this data wasn't available before, but now it is, and they're going to make every effort to provide this data. But I'm just flat on my back over the fact that 10 missing juveniles from this really are small communities here since the first of the year. And I don't mean to put her on her spot. She's here to report today, but that was good work. You did that, and I don't know if you want to comment on that or anything, but that was astounding and tragic.
Thank you, Senator Case.
Madam Chair, Director Chambers would like to give further testimony.
Okay. We will recall Director Chambers. I can see you. Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Don't know if it was necessary, but I did want to directly address the reimbursement component. As my division routinely reimburses law enforcement for having victim witness coordinators and administering those, my office administers those grants. I can tell you that my sense is that local law enforcement does have the ability to carry that cost, knowing that they'll get reimbursed. They do have their own evidence budgets, and I think that they can, we say front the cost, knowing that they will get reimbursed in a timely manner. So that is sort of standard protocol, very in line with state procurement policy, but was very grateful for Commander Cox's comments about being willing to look at that. Because, you know, you're right, some of the really small agencies might not be able to have that working capital of up to 10 grand for a case. But I did just want to address that briefly, since that is something we work with routinely. We also routinely front the cost for sexual assault SANE exams, you know, through our office to take that off of law enforcement agency budgets. So just wanted to provide that additional context.
Thank you, Director Chambers. Go ahead, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Director Chambers, since you came back on and Senator Case queued up a question. So when your report came out and the databases came public, and now we have, you know, the media, people have interest in what's going on. So what is the timeliness of updates to this database? So some of these children, and I read the article and I thank my colleague for providing it. It's a week ago or 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So I guess I don't know how timely is tracking if a child is found, hopefully in safe condition or otherwise, how does that get entered in? What's the timeliness of entry so we can actually have a real-time understanding of these cases? Thank you, Madam Chairman, Director.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Go ahead, Director Chambers.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Senator Barlow, so while the database is not 24/7, because we do have staff that work, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, staffing that, they update as quickly as possible. The real key and sometimes the potential lag we see is actually from the originating agency. So DCI, and if you really want to get in the weeds, we can recall Commander Cox, because of course he is the person who built this database and works with it more closely. But the control terminal will enter as soon as we receive information from the reporting agency. So remember, these individuals have to be reported missing to their local law enforcement, and then local law enforcement transmits that to DCI. There is, similar to the conversation from Representative Penn, there is a spot on the missing persons website to make a tip and directs them, to local law enforcement to get that reported. But once DCI has it, it's very quick, near instantaneous. And as soon as DCI similarly receives the clearance criteria, they will take that down. I appreciate Senator Case drawing that attention. I routinely monitor a missing persons site, specifically Indigenous children who go missing, because it does. I mean, if you look at the missing person list for the entire state, there are a disproportionate number of youth. And that's something that maybe merits a deeper conversation at another time. But it is fairly real time, but it is dependent on the local agency. And with that, Commander Cox could add any additional information if needed, as he is more well versed in that than I.
Thank you. Go ahead, follow up, Senator Barlow.
Thank you very much. No, I don't need a deeper dive. I do appreciate that. The clearance, though, does the clearance rely on the originating law enforcement as well? Does that have to be cleared through the originating law enforcement? Or can any reporting law enforcement clear or potentially clear a missing person? Thank you.
Director?
Chairwoman, Senator Barlow, I believe it has to come from the agency that submitted the report, but that really is a Commander Cox question. I saw him pop up for a second, and so we'll see. But I believe they have to make the report and they also have to clear it. So that is my understanding. And if I'm incorrect, I believe Commander Cox will correct me.
Go ahead. Excuse me, Co-Chair Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just because Kara popped back up on our screen. Can you tell us if Dr. Grant is what she's working on, or if she's still engaged with the task force, and what her next focus is in her work?
Director?
Chairwoman, Co-Chairwoman Ellis, absolutely. Of course, Emily, as I refer to her, Dr. Grant, is my partner in crime, and we are continually working with them. In fact, we, meaning the Division of Victim Services, on behalf of the MMIP Task Force, will be engaging the Wyoming Survey and Analysis Center, where Dr. Grant is employed, for another 2-year contract to continue research on missing and murdered Indigenous persons. Specifically, what they are working on are a couple of things. One, and I believe they presented this information at one of your meetings, but working on missing adults, because this is the big gap that we have. We understand that when a child is reported missing, that is absolutely should be reported to law enforcement immediately through the National Centers for Missing and Exploited Children. There's a lot of guidelines and information about that. But one of the things that we find is that when an adult goes missing, that's not necessarily a crime. There are circumstances where it can be, and that's where the Ashanti alert comes in, with those elevated circumstances where we need to get that alert out because we don't think it's just a matter of someone choosing to be missing, if you will. So we have engaged WISAC to do a nationwide analysis of state laws. Unfortunately, Wyoming is sort of maybe not the naughty list, but we don't have robust statutes about when an adult goes missing and protocol for when and how they do get entered into the database. And again, that would have to be language, so perhaps in statute that would speak to the local agencies on what we expect from them or what we would mandate from them in the case of a missing adult. And that is sort of what I teased with the reference to Patricia's Law. Again, I hope to be able to perhaps, if you are willing, maybe do a deeper dive into that law and some of the other laws that we were informed about when we went to that national conference. Because I do think there's, states are looking into this issue and other states are ahead of us on some things. I'm happy to report that Wyoming is tremendously ahead of the curve on this issue. I never cease to be proud of the work of your committee and of the legislature and of the governor's office for keeping this issue on people's minds and routinely go to these national conferences where Wyoming is set out as an example in a good way.
Follow up, Senator, excuse me, Co-Chair Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then one more question for Kara. I know, Kara, you had been putting on or making people aware of a podcast that you participated in, as well as some others that won an award. And it has to do with the work that the task force has been undertaking. Can you give the committee just a quick summary of what that was?
Yes,
Director?
I'm happy to, although I thank you, Chairwoman Oakley and Co-Chairman Ellis. Yes, in fact, very proud of the work that many of us have done, including Senator Ellis, who were interviewed for. There is an Audible podcast called Invisible: Life and Death on the Reservation, and that was submitted for a Pulitzer Prize, which is very exciting. I don't know where they are in that process, and I don't know how that works. And my husband has assured me that that doesn't mean that I get a Pulitzer Prize, but nonetheless, it's very exciting to have been a small part of that podcast. So again, it's an Audible podcast called Invisible: Life and Death on the Reservation, and it focuses on the case of Jocelyn Watt and Jade Wagon on the Wind River Indian Reservation and the broader issue of how our state has wrapped our arms around the issue and are addressing MMIP in our state. So thank you for that plug. Although I will let you know that Dr. Grant refuses to listen to any podcast that she's on. So
Thank you, Director. Further questions, follow-up comments? Okay, seeing none, we will let you go for a minute or two at least, Director. Okay, so last call for further public comment at this time. Okay, seeing none, we will close that topic and then we're going to move on to what's next on the agenda, which is a continued discussion of online sales tax. And so I guess, first of all, my question is, do we have anybody from the Wind River Tax Commission in the room? Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, good. And so we'll go ahead and call you up. And then I guess just generally, what we have is, of course, we discussed it at length in the last interim. And we've continued to have those discussions with the tax commission as well as with the individual tribes. And so, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Co-Chairwoman Ellis, we're kind of just looking to see where the tax commission and the individual tribes are to see if it's ripe to move forward for any legislation or not. So, because we've kind of, after the end of last interim, we ended with or not. So, and that's still fine if that's where we're at. So go ahead and come up, if you would, and we'll go from there. Okay. Good morning. If you would introduce yourself and then go ahead and proceed with testimony.
Clarence Aragon, Wind River Tax Commission Director.
Luana St. Clair, Admin Assistant with the Wind River Tax Commission.
Okay, thank you both for being here. And Ms. St. Clair, Mr. Aragon, either one, go ahead.
So I have a prepared statement. I'll go ahead and read it. This is dated May 1st, 2024. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Select Committee on Tribal Relations for inviting the Wind River Tax Commission to give our thoughts and feedback on the proposed bills 24 LSO 0319 and 24 LSO 0320. These bills are regarding the remote sales tax collected by the Wyoming Department of Revenue on the Wind River Indian Reservation. On April 22nd, 2024, my department met with our tax commissioners and we reviewed each bill with open conversation. We have made the decision to encourage Eastern Shoshone Business and Northern Arapaho Business Councils to pursue Bill 24 LSO-0320. This bill outlines details of all revenue generated from remote sellers to be distributed back to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. This bill also compensates the Department of Revenue for 1% for their administration expenses, while 99% of the remaining revenue would return back to the tribes. We understand an agreement must be in place amongst both tribes, so our department will work diligently on forming a resolution to benefit both parties. This is a small step in creating a great working relationship with the state of Wyoming and the Department of Revenue. We are hopeful this agreement can be a foundation of further success in taxation on the reservation. Once again, thank you for the invitation, and we hope our next meeting together is finalizing or discussing the benefits of this bill. Sincerely, the Wind River Tax Commission.
Great, thank you for that. Mr. Aragon, did you want to add anything? Okay, well, thank you both. So questions? Yes, Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I really appreciate that testimony and your recommendation. Just in your decision-making, a lot of these concepts comes from South Dakota because they were very similarly situated as with Wyoming and how we collect online sales tax and some of those conversations and then their relationships with their tribes. Have you reached out to any of your counterparts in South Dakota, the South Dakota tribes, to get their feedback? And it's fine if you haven't, but I am just kind of curious if what their experience has been in having these negotiated compacts with the state of South Dakota.
Mr. Aragon?
No, we have not reached out to the tribes, but we've done research and we've seen how it's benefited each tribe. I think for us, our reservation is a little unique because we have three forming governments. We have the Northern Arapaho, the Eastern Shoshone, where they can act as their own, and then we have intertribal. So it kind of makes things a little difficult for us, but just following back on our last meeting in November, we were all prepared to go forward with an MOU or a compact. And after we were given the authorization to form this MOU, we had meetings with the Intertribal Council. And from my understanding is that both tribes are going to reserve their own rights in their taxation, meaning that whatever land they owned, then they can enforce their own taxation. For example, their casinos. So that will take that off the table for us. But as an intertribal program, we're still interested to see if an MOU or a compact can be pursued with taxation, leaving those properties off.
Any further follow-up? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I appreciate the statement. What I guess I'm unclear with is a little bit is, would you like this committee to advance this bill to be considered at the next meeting? And then you concurrently are going to work on the agreement that you spoke of? Or do you want us to withhold working on the legislation and potentially modifying it until the agreement is reached? And if you don't know the answer to that, or we're not clear, I just want to know if you would like us to advance this. We're not going to work the bill maybe today, but at least advance it so it's on the agenda for the next meeting to be worked. If that's your desire, or because we only have 2 meetings, if I recall correctly. So if we want to queue this up as legislation that we would take forth as a committee, a timing issue has to be understood. And I just want to have clarification from your perspective, Mr. Director. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Go ahead, Mr. Aragon.
Thank you. So I think our next step going forward would be to schedule a special meeting with the Intertribal Council. And following back on our November meeting, after we were given the authorization and we found out with the Department of Revenue that this MOU can only work with the entirety of the sales tax. Just completing an MOU for an online sales tax wouldn't work, as it would violate existing laws. Excuse me. So we'll go ahead and get a special meeting scheduled with the Intertribal Council. And I know that the select committee would feel more comfortable with a resolution coming from Intertribal Council. So we'll get a meeting scheduled and then determine, following that, then we'll go ahead and give you guys an answer on whether to pursue the bill or not. Because right now I can't speak for both councils, but from the tax commission, we would go ahead and say, go ahead and pursue the bill.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think that's a really good approach. What we might do is just tentatively say, well, we're going to put it on the next agenda, but it's not official. And we don't want to get ahead of you. We understand sometimes political relationships, and, you know, if we get ahead, that's not a good thing. So tentatively, let's think about maybe having it on the next agenda, but we won't have to make up our mind about that until really 2 weeks before the final meeting. So, I mean, technically. So I hope it works out.
Thank you, Senator Case. Any follow-up there from the tax commission? Hold on, did you have any further follow-up there? Okay, because we've got further questions, it looks like, from the committee. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I don't know who this question is for, if it's for the tax commission or for LSO or other committee members or even members of the public. But I just looking at this, it says collecting tax on sales sourced to the Wind River Indian Reservation. Do we have it? What does sourced to mean? I just would maybe appreciate some clarification on that language.
Go ahead.
Chairman and members of the committee. Source to is a term of art that's used by the Department of Revenue. And so in general, it means that if the sale originated from an address on the reservation, that would be sourced to. And so remember so just for the committee's benefit, there were two bills before you. One of them was, or last year, one of them was the 24 LSO 319. And that's the one that I believe Mr. Aragon is discussing. And it only exempts online sales from sales tax. And then 24 LSO 320, what that one would do is that would say any sales that are sourced to the reservation that where tax is actually collected, whether it's a use tax or a sales tax, that those taxes would be collected, but then they would be held by the Department of Revenue, and then they would be distributed to the tribes once an agreement was made with each individual tribe and the state of Wyoming. So so if you go back to 24 LSO 319, in essence, so again, this wouldn't, I think maybe we are mixing a little bit of apples and oranges. That's right, because, and if you want, we can, LSO is, if you wish, is happy to work with the tax commission to really explain the difference between these two bills. Because 24 LSO 319, all that does is basically says, if the sale is sourced to the reservation, if it is, so for example, if you make, living on the reservation, Representative Penn, if you buy something from Amazon, then you will not have to pay taxes on state or local taxes on, and I shouldn't say that, state taxes or the local taxes that are imposed. You won't have to pay taxes on those. So we wouldn't actually need an MOU for that one because there's no taxes collected. And then if you go to 24 LSO 320, it is a little bit more confusing because the way it's, if you go to page 2 of that bill draft, this is just, page 2 deals with the state sales tax distribution. And then if you go to page 3, at the top of page 3 on line 2, this distribution, that's talking about the local sales tax. And then on line 13, that's the state use tax. And then on page 4, line 4, that's the local use, general and specific purpose taxes. So those are the ones where we collect them, the state collects them right now. They just don't go back to the tribes. But again, it is complicated if you don't, even for LSO, we worked with our LSO attorney that works with sales taxes all the time, just because the statutes are a little bit complicated.
Thank you, Ms. Sharp. That's very, very helpful. And I do think, I know we talked about it a lot last time and now we haven't discussed it. So we kind of need to all reorient ourselves to the different options or possibilities here. Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just, I think to clarify the record, I understood that the testimony was 320 was the preferred approach. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. 320, which is not the exemption. 319 is a complete exemption for the tribal lands. 320 is a continues the collection of sales and use tax, but provides for the distribution to the tribes through an agreement. So I think there may have been just a little, I just want to make it clear for the public record, for people that might be listening in or otherwise, that 320 was at least at this point, understanding we'll move forward with 320 as the guiding, public policy approach. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. So through this discussion, are we still, Mr. Aragon, I agree with Senator Barlow. So is there further discussion to have on both, or are we firmly in camp 320? Go ahead, Mr. Aragon.
Thank you. Firmly, we're gonna stick with 320.
Madam Co-Chair?
Madam Chair, and just to offer, and when we work on these bills in the interim, we can adjust language. And so as you're engaging with both councils, if you see additional parameters or language tweaks that need to be made or different concepts that need to be introduced, we welcome that. You can get that to the chairman in advance of our next meeting. LSO can either prepare a new draft entirely based on your feedback, and we can consider that. But it's so much easier to get that language in place before we vote on it to introduce it. Once we vote on it to introduce it, then we have to go through the entire process, the legislative process, to get those amendments adopted. So the more we refine during this working year, the easier it is and the better it is, I think, for the bill in general. So please know, like, if you have comments, both tribes, if you have comments or amendments to this language, let us know.
Thank you, Co-Chair Ellis, and I think that's a point really well made, because we kind of have an early meeting and a late meeting here. So we've got some time to work on this, as long as we don't let it get away from us. I think 2 comments down there. Go ahead, Senator Case.
Well, Madam Chairwoman, this is really kind of a historic turn, if we'll think about it. And it could be really good for people on the Wind River Reservation and their governments that have been starved for funding. And I'm kind of excited about this approach as opposed to the exemption approach. We proposed something similar for cigarettes at one time. Maybe that'll work itself out. But I think another interested parties are going to be the local governments in Fremont County, which will lose some tax revenue in this process. But it's not going to be a lot of tax revenues, I suspect. And I think this is a healthy way to go. Thanks a lot. That's some good thinking.
I appreciate that, Senator Case. I also tend to agree, but again, while of course deferring to what the residents on the reservation want. Go ahead, Representative Cheswick.
Just a question, and this is a rookie question, new on the committee. Do we need to, as a committee, give permission to LSO to work with the tax commission so that the language, they can work out the language together and bring it back to us in our next meeting?
Thank you, Representative Chestick. No, and we can work with the commission and the chair, my co-chair and I and LSO, and we've done that and we'll continue to do that. So we've met with the tax commission and so we can take care of that. Did you have a further question, Senator Barlow?
Madam Chairman, actually, just a follow-up to that. I think it's also important. I know Department of Revenue has been a good partner, but I think that, some of I've worked on numerous tax issues with Department of Revenue, and sometimes they can get complex. So I appreciate that the co-chairs will be involved should there need to be some understanding of interacting with the executive branch. There's several branches of government here and separate governments too. So I think it's critical that the chairman are in the loop as much as needed. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Further questions? I feel like, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Brett Fanning from the Department of Revenue is online for discussion as well.
Okay, does he want to be called in and give testimony? And I know that the tax commission is familiar with Mr. Fanning.
His hand is raised.
And he's always helpful and knowledgeable. We always like to hear from Mr. Fanning. So go ahead if you can hear us. We can't see you, at least now. There you are. Good morning. Go ahead and introduce yourself and proceed, Mr. Fanning.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, members of committee, Brett Fanning, Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. Truly, I agree with a lot of discussion here. This is really a historic moment just based on some of the conversations that we've been having over the past few years. It sounds like this approach is really geared towards that LSO draft 0320, and that is something that the Department of Revenue, in collaboration with everyone, this is something that we can work to administer. The previous draft with the exemption 03119 was something that we would have issues administering. So my comments are just going to be focused on 0320 just based on this conversation. So the first question that came up was, Madam Chair, it was related to the source to language from Representative Penn. This is just where the customer takes possession of the item. So where is it going to be shipped to? And that's just the language that we find in statute related to our sourcing guidelines, where the customer takes possession of the item. Okay, so then the other questions that popped up through some of the other testimony was, so we've got this remote seller language that's incorporated in this bill. And so the department has some administration, I don't know if they're concerns or issues, but companies that are located in Wyoming and then outside of Wyoming, they could have a in-store or an in-state license, and then they can also have a remote seller license. And so we just, there needs to be discussions on, okay, if you purchase from a big box retailer and you actually purchase it in store and you buy the exact same product, but you have it shipped to you as opposed to purchasing it in store, is that a distinction that the committee wants to make? That's something that the Department of Revenue has, I don't know if it's a concern, but that's something we're really going to have to navigate. Because remote seller language in our statutes is basically, okay, you're not in Wyoming, but you meet some sort of economic threshold where you have to license and collect tax with us. So that's essentially what a remote seller was. And there was a bill last year, House Bill 197, that kind of updated the thresholds for remote seller guidelines. So starting July 1, a remote seller is going to be someone who's not located in Wyoming, but they make more than 100,000 in gross sales into the state of Wyoming. If you do that, you have to license with us and start collecting our tax. So we do have some, and the Department of Revenue is certainly willing to work with the governor's office, with the Wind River Tax Commission, with this committee to really hammer down that language. So that's something I think that we can really navigate to, and we can get there. I think we can. One other thing that came up was, so the source to, the ship to, the Wind River Indian Reservation. Okay, so right now, if you're a remote seller, you just report based on a jurisdiction code, and that's by county. So for example, we're primarily, but not all, talking about Fremont County here. So that would require some updates in our system, which usually means IT programming costs, to somehow separate out the Wind River Indian Reservation so that our retailers and our remote sellers and our marketplace facilitators, sorry, not to confuse it, can actually collect tax and send it to the right spot. So that's a consideration that we certainly have. Another thought that came up too is, so right now, there is already an exemption on the books for the vast majority of these sales. That's why I'm testifying in front of you here today, is because there already is an exemption. And so the department doesn't have this magical pool of money to know what's already being sourced to the Wind River Indian Reservation. So with this proposed legislation, is the thought here that now all online sales are going to be taxable on the reservation to anyone. And then at the end of the day, month, year, quarter, however it is, are we going to distribute money back out? I also have a question, just looking at the language too. Is this meant to only distribute the erroneously collected sales tax? If that's the case, the Department of Revenue doesn't know how much that is. We don't know until individual tribal members come to us and say, hey, I've been charged tax in error. So is the thought here, and I don't even know, it's probably something that's outside of the MOU, because the Department of Revenue understands this MOU is to be between the state of Wyoming and the tribal governments for the tax that were collected and then redistributing it back out. So we're trying to distinguish here if this is meant to be erroneously collected sales tax, or are sales from remote sellers now going to be taxable to everyone, enrolled tribal members, if I lived on the reservation, if anyone did, and then we're going to distribute that tax out. So I think that's an important consideration that everyone needs to realize. If that's the case, this agreement is a little bit different than what's going on in the state of South Dakota. I did call and talk to my counterpart on this one.
Madam Chair, can I interrupt for a second, Director Fanning?
Sorry, Director Fanning, Madam
Just
Co-Chair
to
wants
kind
to
of
follow up right now. Go ahead.
Just to nip that a little bit in the bud, I think that's what we're trying to get away from, is like what's erroneous and what's not erroneous. Like this would be, the thinking would be this is an agreement where the tribes recognize that there'll be a tax implication for some of their members. So the ability, and this is just my thinking, I mean, certainly it's a discussion point, but we're trying to get away from, the burden for each person to have to file this exemption for small amount of taxes collected. So I just want to say, I don't think we're trying to get in the weeds of saying there's an agreement and we still have all these old systems in place from the legacy collection system. So I don't think we're going down that path, but that's my thoughts on that.
And before you get started, Director Fanning, we've got to follow up on that from Senator Case.
Yeah, and Director Fanning, just tagging on the good co-chairman. I think the only way this is going to work is if we all impose the tax. But it's about the distribution of the tax and providing the revenue streams to tribal governments. It's actually going to be a higher revenue stream that goes to local governments in Wyoming, because there will, as I understand this, there wouldn't be a state share of the sales tax at all other than the administration. So it's actually going to be, they get to decide the full distribution of that tax between them, but it eliminates, in essence, the exemption and makes everything taxable, which is good for administration. And I think it's a good partnership, and it would provide them a significant revenue stream that they would be able to use for tribal governmental purposes. But I think it'd be easier on the department than any other system. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Senator Case. Go ahead, any comment to that, and anything else, of course, you want to say, Administrator Fanning?
Madam Chair, thank you. That was absolutely the dialogue that the Department of Revenue was wanting to hear. Just for clarification on our parts, not for any other reason, but just for the clarification, because that is something that will be a monumental shift. It is still a little different than the South Dakota models, where for tax purposes only, and again, for the second time, for tax purposes only in the state of South Dakota, those reservations are considered just like the state of South Dakota. And so everything is taxable unless there's an exemption. And then there's distribution to those tribal entities. So that's certainly something, this is a definitely a different conversation that we've had in the past, where the tribal members are, it sounds like, at least from what I've heard, willing to tax themselves and then get some of that tax back via the MOU agreement. So certainly willing to partner there.
Let's be very careful, Madam Chairwoman.
Senator, go ahead, Senator Case.
The tribal business councils have not weighed in. It's only possibility. It's a long shot possibility, but the tax commission, as I understand it, supports exploring this topic. So I'm trying not to get the cart too far ahead of the horse here, because it's a very delicate discussion, and without the involvement of the business councils and the direction of the leaders of the tribal governments in this process, it'll fall flat on its face. So right now it's just a potential proposal, and that the tax commission is going to work on it, and we'll provide assistance any way they want. So just trying to be careful not to get it this characterized as this is what we're going to do, because this is a long ways from this is what we're going to do, but it is a possibility.
Thank you, Senator Case. Is there anything further that you would like to add, Administrator Fanning?
Madam Chair, thank you. Just based on Senator Case's comments, I think I'll leave some of my other more intricate details for further discussions, and I'd be willing to stand for any other questions.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Just a quick one. So on the draft that we're looking at, we're talking about remote sellers, and you mentioned the marketplace. Does the marketplace seller, is that encompassed in that too? Or do we need to just kind of look at that definition?
Administrator Fanning?
So, Madam Chair, Co-Chair Ellis, so in that draft bill, the 30 on line 12, the 3915-501 is the statute for remote sellers. And then 3915-502 is the statute for marketplace facilitators. So based on this draft bill, we believe it includes both of those.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize for interrupting you, but as Senator Case mentioned, it's delicate and complicated. And so I just didn't want to go down too many rabbit holes. I think there are things we definitely need to sort through, but thank you for testifying and giving us some additional things to think about today.
Yes, thank you, Administrator Fanning. So further questions for Mr. Fanning? Okay, thank you. I'm sure you probably will, but if you just stick around in case we have any follow-up as the discussion continues. And yes, Councilwoman, were you wanting to testify?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll wait until we're finished with the tax commission here. And then we will, of course, see about the tribes wanting to weigh in.
Thanks for thinking about this.
Yeah, that sounds great. Any further questions for Mr. Aragon, Ms. St. Clair of the Tax Commission at this time? All right, thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And then
Thank
what
you.
we will do, and so we can go ahead and call anybody who's interested from the Northern Arapahoe Business Council to come up and discuss on this.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. If you'd introduce yourself and then go ahead and proceed.
Right here. Oh, yeah. Morning. Glad to see you all here this morning. My name is Councilwoman Kim Whiteman Harjo. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was we're talking about taxation right now. And we all know that there's a statute already in the state of Wyoming that Native Americans, Eastern Shoshone, Northern Arapaho. We also have other Native tribes that live here. But right now it just mostly concentrates on Eastern Shoshone, Northern Arapaho, are tax exempt. You have that statute out there through the state of Wyoming, but a lot of the businesses that we have business with do not honor that statute. And now here we are going down another road of collecting taxes when we're already taxed, when we shouldn't be taxed. So I don't know if you have a compliance out there that you send out to make sure your statutes are followed. But right now, there are a lot of businesses that still tax tribal members, even if they do business out here on the Render Reservation. So we have our tarot here that looks at those things, but I'm asking the state, what do you do to ensure that we're not taxed? Because we are being taxed right now. We do have data that says which businesses tax those type of things. And then now we're looking at another road of taxing us again. So I just wanted to bring that point up and give you something to think about in the future, because that's a lot of stuff that's on a lot of our people's minds out here, is imposing another tax on us when we're not even supposed to be taxed when we do business.
Thank you, Councilwoman Harjo. Go ahead, Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's been the rub.
Mhm.
You know, we've heard from the Department of Revenue, just the sensitivity of doing audits and Department of Audit to come out onto the reservation because of concerns of overstepping on your jurisdiction. And so that's, I mean, been the lynch point of where we've had this conversation of then do we just wholly exempt, or do we come up with a mechanism? So I don't know if when you're saying that these businesses are already being taxed.
We go into business to go buy items such as High Plains.
Sure.
We're taxed.
I think that the question then is.
Let's go through the chair, both of you, please. Thank you.
Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Madam Chair. So the question though is, I don't think it'd be a new tax. It's the tax that's already collected and where it's distributed on the back end. Because right now, you know, Wyoming and Fremont County receive those dollars. I think what we're looking at is, you know, not increasing a new tax, but if the tax that's being collected rather is just directed back to the tribes.
Mhm.
That's, I think, the direction that the tax commission recommended to us. So all of your questions are well taken, but we could just talk about these in circles for days. And but those were the kind of options.
Mhm.
But 19 would provide a blanket exemption, because it's tricky for us to have the enforcement mechanism that doesn't
Mhm.
maybe impose on both tribes' sovereignty.
Yes.
Councilwoman?
Madam Chair. So one of the reasons why we created our tax commission is to look at those things that are happening right now. It's a lot of money that we have already been taxed. It's unfair. And then when we go in to get license plates, that type of thing, now I hear that they're weighing cars instead of actually paying your tax exempt license plate. So that's another something that I'm going to be looking into to find out if it's true or not. But those are some complaints that we have received from tribal members. I don't know. I had a thought, but I had lost it. But I believe that we do really need to have these conversations because our constituents are worried about it. A lot of our people do use the internet. A lot of times when we do show our tribal ID to let them know that we are enrolled, we're faced with, well, this is my business and I'll run it how I want to. And we're not intending to be mean. We don't want to be treated that way when we do go into business, but we do want to be respected through that statute. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Hold on. Further questions for the Councilwoman? All right, thank you. Is there anybody else, since we're on Northern Arapaho, from the Northern Arapaho tribe, who would like to either on the council or otherwise would like to make comment as far as this? Eastern Shoshone Business Council, or representatives, anyone interested in talking about the tax issue? I see the chairman, I believe, coming up. And I know Councilman Washakie has joined us as well. I don't know if you're wanting to come up or not. Nope. Okay. All you, Chairman St. Clair.
Okay, Madam Co-Chairs, members of the committee. It was encouraging to hear that our tax commission has reviewed this and made this recommendation. I agree with the recommendation. I do have some, and I can't speak for both tribes, but I have some minor edits for the bill in terms of the distribution. Otherwise, generally speaking, the Eastern Shoshone Tribe supports this approach. We had authorized earlier or last year for the commission to pursue an MOU. So that's in line with what was presented today. So
Oh.
thank you very much.
That's great, Chairman St. Clair. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. It's helpful. We're moving forward. Any questions, comments? Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Madam Co-Chair, just an ask, certainly when these bills come before the legislature, it's always helpful to have letters and council resolutions indicating support. And then, as we've discussed, we meet twice a year. And so for our next hearing, the more we have lined out ahead of time, the better. So to the extent you have edits and suggested amendments, please let us know in advance. My co-chair and I will take those up. We'll make sure we work with LSO so that we are working on a draft that reflects those changes. So thank you for your willingness to work with us on this. I think we can have some informal conversations before we get to our next hearing. So we're all prepared.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chairman St. Clair.
Co-Chairman Oakley, like Mr. Aragon pointed out, we'll be meeting with the commission and the intertribal, and we'll consider those. And if we do decide to come forward with a resolution, we'll send it to you.
Thank you. Further questions or comments for Chairman St. Clair? Seeing none, thank you.
You're welcome.
I did notice that there was a family connection to the tax commission as well. But Madam Chairwoman,
Yes, Senator Case.
I've been trying to think, the last time we were in this room, I believe we had an issue, the discussion of the taxes imposed by High Plains Power. And it's been a long time ago and I don't exactly remember. But I reached out to them. It was on our first day of our meeting and I reached out to them and then we had some information we provided on our second day of our meeting. And I don't remember the specifics and I can't find an email and I'm sorry about that. But I remember the gist of it was that it was a matter of documentation, that if the documentation were provided, they were happy to grant that. And so I don't know if there's a more organized way that cooperation can happen between tribal government and High Plains to figure out maybe a better way to do that documentation. But as I remember, the High Plains has no interest in collecting the tax or any retailer. They have to send the taxes on. They don't get to keep the taxes. So if they don't have to collect it, they don't have to send it on. So it's not a financial gain to them. It may be a bookkeeping nightmare or something. I don't know, nightmare is not the right word, but it may have some bureaucratic things, but there's no incentive for a retailer to want to keep taxes that they've collected. I mean, there's no way they can do that. So they don't want to collect them if they don't have to. And so I remember High Plains being very willing to make sure that they didn't collect taxes when they weren't required. So we
No.
could invite them to our next meeting if you want. I'm sure they'd love to talk to us.
I appreciate that, Senator Case, and while it's not specifically on the agenda, I think it's appropriate. We're talking about these taxation issues. So I guess with that, is there anybody in the room that has updates or thoughts or knowledge on that? It looks like maybe, nope, something different. So is there anybody here that had any specific dealings with the High Plains, whether that exemption form got distributed and we saw some relief on that issue? Anybody have any updates or comments on that? Go ahead, Councilman Spoonhurter's coming up. Oh, Councilwoman His Chase.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the form that you're talking about has been distributed a lot of at our senior centers, and High Plains Power has really helped our tribal members get those forms filled out and get the appropriate paperwork. And then some of our tribal members are receiving relief from the tax exemption from High Plains Powers.
Well, good. Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've heard that some members are receiving relief, but I've also heard that a lot of tribal members who approached High Plains and were wanting to receive a tax reimbursement, they were unwilling and replied that they did not understand what they were talking about. And so I think that when the word was out about the taxes being able to be distributed back to the tribal members, I think High Plains may have been bombarded by many at once, or I'm not sure what the reason is for them turning people away and stating that they weren't sure that they didn't know what they weren't sure what they were talking about. And so I think there's a big disconnect in the communication right now between High Plains and the tribes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both for that. Wait, we've got a follow-up question.
I'll just commit if I can help solve that. I know the folks at High Plains. I've worked with them on other electric matters. I'd be happy to work personally to try to resolve this.
Appreciate that, Senator Case. So
Okay.
if there's any
Thank you.
any specific, you're running into specific obstacles, feel free to reach out to Senator Case, myself. Okay, appreciate that. So I know, I think there was maybe some general comment. Would you like to come up, Mr. Wentland, and provide that while we're still have this topic open? Go ahead, introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman Oakley, members of the committee. Again, Kit Wentland, Special Counsel, Tribal Relations Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. Just two quick comments. And the first would be, of course, if we get a proposal for an MOU authorized by the tribes, either through the tax commission, or if it's partitioned and there's jurisdiction for the tax commission only in a specific place, and then it's different jurisdictions. Want to make sure we're respectful of who has jurisdiction where on the reservation between the tribes. We're happy to evaluate those proposals. I do think the intent behind this bill, I understand the intent. I do think we just need to make sure there's a thorough review vetting process for the administration, legal definition language between now and the next meeting. We're happy to engage with DOR with you in that process. I think the other thing I just wanted to flag, and I'll let Brett, of course, correct me if I get wrong on tax details, because he knows a lot more than I do. The state and, the governor of the state, if tax is collected on a tribal member through remote or online sales tax now, it's in error. And I think we've probably gone over that a lot. I just want to make sure people didn't walk away from the meetings thinking right now, if there's not an exemption in the statute, the state is trying to actively tax tribal members on trust land or reservation land, or the land that fits within those statutorily at the federal level exempted land. That is not currently, the state is not trying to tax those for state coffers. What's happening now is an error. And I understand from the committee that these efforts are meant to remedy that error, whatever way works best between the two tribes and the commission. it just gets so delicate with this conversation. I wanted to make sure people understood that's the goal, is to remedy that error. Whatever way the tribes tell us is the respectful way to do that on their end, because I don't want to inadvertently step on a landmine here or there otherwise. Thank you for your involvement. Questions, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, comments for Mr. Wentland? Go ahead.
A comment to bolster what you're saying, Mr. Wentland, is that really a lot of this has arisen because of the popularity of online shopping. You know, a lot of these very, very delicate sales tax, lodging tax, all of those kind of tax issues have grown out of US Supreme Court decisions for the last several decades. And the world of commerce has just changed. So to your point, this isn't something I think Wyoming is actively seeking to do. It's just that's how the online world works. And then it doesn't fit well with the structure that the Supreme Court has laid upon Indian country and Indian people when it comes to state sales tax collection. So that is a very important point. I just want to remind everyone that's how this came about, and we're trying to fix it, and we're trying to get there and have a couple of different options. So thank you for making that clarification.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wentland. Okay. Actually, before you leave, just before you leave, I think I saw Mr. Fanning on there, and I think I saw his hand up, and I didn't know if it had remained up or if he wanted to join in. And while you're still here, Administrator Fanning, are you there, and are you wanting to make comment?
Yep, I'm still here. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wetland, he nailed it. That's spot on as far as the current approach right now. I also wanted to weigh in on the High Plains power situation. I'm actively involved almost on a weekly basis with this particular situation. If you remember a few years back, I had made a proposal to this committee that if anybody had they were charged tax in error, that they were more than welcome to reach out to me, and I could act as a liaison to make sure that if they paid tax in error, they got it back. And High Plains Power has been a really good partner. Yes, they did receive a lot of requests, and I do know that they did receive outreach from the community, just to make sure they weren't taxing their citizens in error. It is important to note that utility companies, there is sales tax on electricity here in the state of Wyoming. So the default for them is to actually charge the customer sales tax unless they are told otherwise. And in this particular situation, unless they are told otherwise, is that exemption certificate. It protects them in the case of an audit, if the state of Wyoming were to come and look at those books. So if they were charged tax in error and it meets statute of limitations, then the documentation checks out. High Plains Power has been actively and diligently getting that money back to customers. If there ever is someone sitting in the audience or online that's having an issue talking to these big companies, give me a phone call, send me an email. I know there are members in the committee that I have certainly helped facilitate getting back tax that was charged in error. Last point, I know time is precious. The utility situation or taxpayers being charged in error, this bill draft will not address that, because a utility company here in the state of Wyoming is not a remote seller. They're a physical location here in the state. It will not address this situation. Based on what I understand, this is specifically related to, or trying to be related to, online sales. And so that's something to note. We've also had discussions in the past where if there is a tribal member that does go into a surrounding city, Riverton, Lander, Thermopolis, there is not an exemption in place, and tax should be charged by the retailer there. There's that two-part test that we're all trying to get, or not what, administratively we're trying to get apart from, and it was based on a US Supreme Court decision that said, hey, if you ship something onto a reservation and it's purchased by a tribal member, there's where that exemption comes into play. So, and with that, thank you for letting me chime in. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Administrator Fanning. We appreciate that. You have such in-depth knowledge of this, and so we appreciate you sharing that with us and being involved, because this is not only a complicated issue, it's several issues. And so to keep them succinct and to figure out where we are and specifically what problem we're trying to solve at any one time. And so to make sure also that we're not saying entities are doing something incorrectly if they're not, things like that. So we appreciate both of you gentlemen for your knowledge and your help. And we'll look forward to continuing to use your knowledge and expertise. So thank you. Any further questions from Mr. Wentland? All right, thank you. And with that, any further public comment on these taxation issues? And what we're looking at going forward? I think we've had some good discussions today. This conversation continues. We'll keep marching forward. Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Madam Chair, I think we'll keep both of these bills alive. There's no need to table a bill. We decide what's on the agenda for the next hearing. I think we'll pick this one up between now and that hearing. As the Tax Commission is engaging with both councils, I just wanted to offer to you, I'm willing to drive up here, participate by Zoom as appropriate, so that maybe we flip the tables and I'm on that side and answering questions about how, our knowledge and what we're trying to achieve here. But would ask if any members, I know Senator Case is engaged on this issue, but any other committee members, if you want to be looped into some of these meetings, just let Chairman Oakley and I know. We'll try and loop you in as best we can, but I just want to be very clear to the councils that this is an issue I've been working on for a while. I care about it. I would love to see some kind of resolution. So as appropriate, if you would like our participation, I will happily participate and see this through.
Thank you, Co-Chair Ellis. I think that that is important. I mean, I hope we make that clear, but that, we come sit here behind this table, but we're also willing to be involved in any way that we can as far as doing the work, having those discussions, and helping out with that. We stand at the ready, just the same as the governor's office and the Department of Revenue, to move this forward and do what kind of the will of the tribal communities are. So it was a great discussion. We've got a lot of interested folks. So I'm heartened we'll move forward on that. But when you guys are having those tax commission meetings or tribal meetings and you want us involved, we're there. So appreciate that. With that, last chance. Okay. We are going to close that to public comment and close that topic. As Senator Ellis said, we don't have to do anything, both 319, 320, or any possible changes that we make between now and November. All that's still on the table. We don't have to limit ourselves. So we're good and we will move on. And what we are going to move on to is a 15-minute break. So I've got 33, so 48, 10:50. We'll be back at 10:50. All right. Well, since we're back on the record, I don't know, is that your honor? Okay, so we're going to move into this new topic that we're delving into that we're very excited about engaging in and kind of taking up as far as this sort of the broader cultural preservation and education sort of concept. And specifically, what we're looking at this meeting, it involves Indigenous rock art protection. And so we have been discussing this and kind of getting our own feet wet and digging in a little bit. And so, of course, our fantastic LSO staff has been doing some work and getting us sort of educated to start with. And so what I'd like is if Mrs. Shippen will take us over the fact sheet that she has prepared. And then, of course, we'll delve into testimony and whatnot. But if you will go ahead, unfortunately, maybe there were some at the front of the room for everybody, was there? So the LSO fact sheet is what we're going to be going over. So go ahead.
All right, thank you, Chairman Oakley. I'm only going to take a minute to go over this. Donna Shippen, Legislative Service Office. The fact sheet just provides an overview of 3 federal laws and 1 state law that have been enacted to protect archaeological resources, including Indigenous rock art sites. So on page 1, the fact sheet first talks about the Antiquities Act of 1906, then goes into the 1966 National Historic Preservation Act, which is the act that established the State Historic Preservation Office and the Tribal Historic Preservation Offices and the National Register of Historic Places. And I did look on our State Historic Preservation Office website to look at what Indigenous rock art sites are listed as National Register of Historic Places in the state, and I attached a list as Appendix A. And I was just talking with the State Historic Preservation Officer, and I'm sorry, my list is not complete, but he can tell you more about that when he testifies. And then on page 2, the fact sheet talks about the 1979 Archaeological Resources Protection Act that was enacted to strengthen legal protection of archaeological resources beyond what the 1906 Antiquities Act did. And that act, which is known as the ARPA Act, the first ARPA Act, I should say, protects resources that are on federal and tribal lands and establishes criminal penalties for damage to those resources. And then the last law that's talked about in the fact sheet is the 1935 Wyoming Prehistoric Deposits, or also known as the Prehistoric Ruins Act. And that requires the State Board of Land Commissioners to issue permits for anyone wanting to excavate any prehistoric ruin, pictograph, or other ancient markings on state or federal land in Wyoming. And it also authorizes the board to promulgate rules to protect those sites. I did look at current Board of Land Commissioner rules and did not find any rules that enforce this particular statute. But I believe the Office of State Lands is online and will be testifying and providing more information about how they enforce that statute. And then on the last page, it just lists the penalties that are established by that state act for damage to archaeological resources. So, and I did attach that statute as Appendix B to the fact sheet. So happy to answer any questions for the committee. I think I'm not the expert in the room on this, though, so I think the other people presenting can probably talk more about these, both the federal and state laws.
That's great. Thank you for your work, Ms. Shippen. Great overview for us again to really kind of do our initial dig in here. I think everybody has a lot to learn about this. So you mentioned that the Office of State Lands is that Mr. Crowder, and is he online?
Yes, Mr. Crowder is online.
Okay, well, go ahead and call him in. I don't have a preference on order here, so I guess I can ask him, and I know some of the state lands, like the director and cohorts are here in the room, so we can go in whatever order makes sense, if you will. So I'll go ahead and call Deputy Director Crowder in and see if he wants to kick us off, or maybe. Can you hear us?
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Director
Can you hear me?
Crowder? I can't see it just yet, but that's okay too.
Okay. Well, I've got my camera turned on, so when it warms up, picture will pop up, I hope.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, and thanks for the opportunity to appear via Zoom and not drive up there today. We don't have much to add to what Ms. Shippen has already provided you. We do have a couple statutes, 3 exactly, that she spoke about that talk to this particular activity, and they were initiated in 1935. In my time here, I don't believe we've ever promulgated. I know we've never promulgated rules, but we've also never had a request for a permit to remove these types of things off of state or federal land. And I don't believe we've ever done that since 1935. I think the Board of Land Commissioners has taken more of a position on how to protect from vandalism or injury or removal by some other user, like an oil and gas operator or something like that. And so it has promulgated some rules around the protection, and mostly it's done that through its oil and gas leasing rules, and that it can stipulate any oil and gas lease on anything to protect for the protection of the public, the environment, or archaeological materials as well. And so what we do is we work with State Parks and Cultural Resources through their SHPO office, and I'm glad Director Glenn and Mr. Beatles are there because they're much more experts in this field than I am. But what we do is we work and coordinate with that office on anything that we would do on state lands, and they run through their inventory to see if there's any known areas of importance or cultural artifacts that need protected, and if there are, then we put a particular stipulation on that lease for that protection. And it is simply that we have statutes that require protection. If an operator runs into one of these types of areas, or if there's a known site, they are to work with a plan, work in a plan of development that's coordinated between the office and the State Historic Preservation Office. So like I said, Madam Chair, we don't have rules put in place for the actual permitting for the removal, but it appears the Board of Land Commissioners for quite some time has just taken the protective tack that anything that would happen needs to run through SHPO and ensure that it's done in an appropriate way. And obviously they're the experts to ensure that it's done in an appropriate way. However, if somebody did make this request, and of course we would work with SHPO to make sure it was an appropriate request, we wouldn't just rely on the expertise of this office or the Board of Land Commissioners before issuing that permit. But we run it through a temporary use permit process, and we have that identified as Chapter 14 within our rules, that process. Again, that's never been employed in the past. To my knowledge, haven't had this request in the past. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Crowder. Questions for state lands? Seeing none at this time, thank you. If you're available, you can go ahead and stick around for any further questions if that's possible. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move on to state lands. And so I would go ahead and call up state lands. I think we've got representatives from the archaeologists, from Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources, from the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So if that crew will come on up. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you introducing us, I guess, a lot to this topic, as we're starting to maybe look at this and learn about this. So we appreciate your knowledge, you being here, and go ahead, introduce yourself and proceed with testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. Dave Glenn, Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. And within our agency here, we have our state archaeologist, Dr. Spencer Pelton, and Brian Beatles here from the State Historic Preservation Office. They're going to kick it off and talk about some of their areas of expertise, and then I'll kind of talk about what we do to protect Indigenous art within state parks and cultural resources.
That's great. Thank you. So go ahead, whoever would like to go next.
Sure. Madam Chair, thank you for having us. This is, I'm really excited that you all are taking this up as an initiative, something I care a lot about. I prepared a little short report on some rock art. I don't know if you've had a chance to go over it, but it basically just gives a broad overview of what we know about rock art in the state of Wyoming right now. According to the database that SHPO manages, there's a little over 1,000 known rock art sites in the state of Wyoming. Those are all documented to varying degrees of completeness. Some of these are just points on a map that members of the public have turned in and said, hey, there's some rock art here. Can we have it recorded somewhere so there's a dot on a map? Others are very extensively recorded. They make 3D models out of them, and they're in reports and kind of things like that. And then a whole range of variation in between. So along with that, we have incomplete, but a pretty decent sample of how many rock art sites have been vandalized in the site or in the state. So for about half of the sites that we know about, we have record on that. In a general sense, around a quarter of rock art sites in the state have some evidence of vandalism. And most commonly, that's initials that are just inscribed over top of rock art images. It's also dates. Occasionally, there's firearm damage from people firing weapons at rock art. So oftentimes these are targeting things like depictions of animals where somebody, hey, look, an elk on a cliff face, I'm going to shoot it. Or there's this really common rock art symbol called a shield-bearing warrior is what archaeologists call it. It's a big circle, kind of looks a lot like a bullseye, and people use it like that occasionally. Some rock art sites are more vandalized than others. When we did a breakdown by land jurisdiction, found that state lands have slightly more rock art vandalism than others. I think personally it's because state lands are more accessible to population centers. These are kind of the places where people go to shoot and dump animals and old dryers and things like that. I think it's probably a function of just accessibility by population centers. Initiatives our office has taken to mitigate this issue. We responded last summer to a pretty egregious case of rock art vandalism north of Rock Springs. This was at the request of Yufna Soldier Wolf, who was involved with the Red Desert Conservation Initiative. So we went out there and basically we just did a really thorough documentation of the site to get a good kind of baseline for what it looked like in 2023, with the expectation of maybe doing some additional public outreach about preserving this site specifically. So it's really been kind of on a case-by-case basis, our response to vandalism on these sites. That's really the broad summary of the reporting we did on this. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get your title right. You're the state archaeologist?
Yes,
So
Madam
do I-
Chair. the state
Archaeologist Pelton. Everybody's got a title. Okay, so thank you. I've got a question, as far as, so the vandalism that was done north of Rock Springs, was there any, like, did the investigation reveal anything as far as who had done it, the recency of it? Was there any sort of prosecution steps taken? Just since you said an egregious one, and it sounds like at least discovered fairly recently.
Madam Chair, no, there's not great lines of evidence for nailing this to individuals. And when we tabulated the dates on the actual rock art itself, people oftentimes inscribe dates. They go all the way back to the 1880s. It was basically constant from the 1880s all the way to 2023. It was still being vandalized as of last year. It's really, really difficult to catch people doing this stuff outside of, heavily patrolling 1,000 rock art sites. It's just difficult. And really the tack that we've taken is just public awareness, just letting people know that this is not an all right thing to do and kind of stigmatizing it as such, so that when somebody thinks it's a good idea to pick up a rock or a piece of metal or something to start inscribing their name on rock art, they might think twice.
Yeah, thank you. Questions, Representative Chestek?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Archaeologist Pelton, I'm still formulating my question, but it seems like I'm not quite sure how the statute works. We have a statute in place from 1935 in section 114. It looks like the State Board of Land Commissioners is authorized to promulgate and enforce such regulations as it may deem needful to protect from vandalism or injury, prehistoric ruins. Any violation of such regulations will be a misdemeanor. And there's a penalty for violation of the act. I'm not sure if we need those regulations to prosecute anybody. Sound like we might need those regulations first before, because the statute doesn't really set forth. I don't know. Do you think there may be situations where you can identify the vandal, right? It's probably rare, but occasionally you may be able to identify the vandal. Do you feel like you would have the ability right now to prosecute them under section 116, or do you need the regulations first? And if you need the regulations first, are there any plans to promulgate such regulations?
So, Mr. Pelton, do you think that there's some strengthening of statute that would be warranted? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I think so. To my knowledge, this act has never been actually used to prosecute anybody. And it was written at such an early time in Wyoming's history of archaeological research. It's very vague in kind of what it protects exactly. We just simply didn't know a lot about the archaeology in the state when this act was passed. I think it was just kind of part of a larger movement to protect cultural resources nationwide at this time. I think that if any amendment were to be added to this act or any kind of regulations, making it very specific that this protects rock art and laying out some pretty specific penalties would be good. I also am not entirely clear which law enforcement entities would be responsible for kind of investigating these things and actually bringing forth charges. And that would be worth clarifying as well. Our office certainly doesn't have the resources to kind of do investigative, like detective work and tracking these individuals down. But it would be great if there was some initiative taken to incentivize other law enforcement entities to do that on our behalf.
Great, thank you. Follow up, Representative Chestek.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And also thank you for the clarification from the co-chair on the question. I think it's unusual for me to understand how you need regulation to create a crime. That's usually a legislative act to have the legislature say these are the elements of a crime, not have some administrative agency say these are the elements of a crime. So it does seem to me like maybe there is some revision to the 1935 Act that we might want to consider as a recommendation from this committee to specify what some of those, how this crime can be committed and put some teeth into the law. That's just my observation.
Any further questions or comments? For,
Chair.
Go ahead, Co-Chairwoman Atlas.
Madam Chair, I think that is the question. If you look at the statutes, right now they're all in Title 36 and our criminal code is what, Title 6? You live in that space, Madam Chair.
That's correct. Although what I think of is like our game and fish laws, there certainly is precedence in our law for the promulgation of rules and then and for prosecution to take place via that realm. So I don't think that that's necessarily out of place, although I would take into account what he's saying as far as going, but without it being specified if that falls on to archaeologists that don't have any sort of law enforcement. So perhaps there's some clarification, and I can talk to LSO. Like I said, the promulgation of rules and enforcement via that doesn't give me heartburn, but maybe it still isn't good what we've got. Okay, further,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the archaeologist, and in full disclosure, I asked for this to be a topic because I read an article last fall about an indigenous rock site, I think located on the reservation. And I like looking at these places. I will drive and make the time to go see them. And I don't always feel like I know where they all are. And I wish we better advertise them because I think people absolutely love seeing them. But then the con of that is that then we're, making it more public for places where kids can go, and not just kids, but drink beer and shoot their firearms and make really horrible, stupid decisions. So I don't know a way to better sort that out. But I guess, we talked about education being a key tool in trying to deter this kind of activity. But when you talked about shooting guns, I'm wondering if there's a way to create like walls so that if you're standing a certain distance, you make it physically impossible for someone to be able to shoot at them. Like the only way they could really shoot at a shield or an animal would be to get close to it, and they wouldn't do that because of fear of ricocheting. So I'm trying to think, I'm just trying to really understand all of this a little bit better, because I think we can and should be doing more to protect these sites. So I don't know if what's kind of out there in the universe. So that's question one. And then question two is, I know a lot of these sites are on BLM lands and other federal lands. Like, just talk to us a little bit about your relationship and working with your federal counterparts and what they're seeing, or if you have any observations about what's happening on those in those areas.
And that's what I was just gonna say, if we're going on, if you want to go ahead and give testimony and or take that question, feel free for this to be open like that. So go ahead.
Sure. I'm Brian Beatles. I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. And to get into that a little bit, some of what our office does with some of these sites is we have developed a site stewardship program where we utilize volunteers around the state basically to monitor some of these sites. And like it was pointed out, a lot of these sites are on BLM or Forest Service land. So we would partner with field office or local office on one of those entities to identify sites that we want to monitor or that they want to have monitored, and also to identify volunteers in those areas to go out and do that monitoring. I think some of our biggest challenge is finding volunteers, and then for anybody that runs a volunteer program, the biggest thing is keeping those volunteers engaged over the long term. I think one of our challenges is that we get people that will go out and will get good active monitoring for like a year or two, and then kind of drops off from there. And then we utilize other tools as part of that. Some of it is we do have a small kind of stockpile like trail cameras. We have some like dummy cameras. We have signs saying this area is under surveillance, just to try and show some sort of presence at some of these sites to try and deter people from doing some of those actions that they shouldn't be doing. And then also just kind of compiling that data to see how it's working. I think one of our next steps with that program is to put together some of the data we have over time. I think we're at a point where we've been doing this long enough, we can put some of that together to see what's working and what's not working. I think that's the next step on our part. And then we've also started some conversations with surrounding states that have a site stewardship program to see, what are they doing that maybe we're not doing, so we can kind of learn from other programs in the region as well.
Madam Chair, if I may add one thing.
Go ahead.
To Madam Co-Chair's comment about kind of placing protective things proactively. I think these are not just images on rock walls, they're also kind of places on the landscape. And so there's a fine balance you have to seek between placing protective measures like that, but also preserving some of the natural character of the site itself. Because you start putting up too many fences or barriers or whatever, it's just going to kind of detract from what makes those places special in the first place. So it is, I think it's a really tough balance to find in how in preserving things, but also maintaining them in their natural state.
And I could build off that, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
And a lot of these, sites are not necessarily in a vacuum. They're tied to a larger site that is not manifested visually, or might have like an underground component, whether it's a campsite, a hearth, or a center of other activity that was happening there while the rock art was being created. So we also have to be sensitive of what's in the ground around there. So yeah, we've had talks about fencing at certain sites, and other ways of having those barriers. But sometimes we don't have enough of the investigation to know if we're going to cause more damage to something that we don't know is there yet.
Thank you, Mr. Beatles. Go ahead, Senator King.
Well, Madam Chairman, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but this is the discussion I'd like to get into, but I don't want to get ahead of the curve here. But definitely these are sites of cultural significance. They, when the Taliban was destroying the Buddhist sites in Afghanistan, everybody said, "Oh my God, that's terrible. They're lost forever." This is our equivalent of it. The White Sands findings of those footprints, and now they've dated them 3 different ways, human footprints of more than 20,000 years, and the 2 radiocarbons and 1 geological. So, these are significant cultural activities on the landscape. Some of them might be just graffiti like Kilroy was here, but some of them have a lot of cultural significance. I tried to share with you the one about in Sings Canyon, where the fertility symbols on the mountain cliff opposite the female fertility symbol of the cavern itself. But we talked about, the Shoshone language, for example, is related to the Aztecian language. It was a vast connection all the way, and you add maybe 22,000 as the pushback of human occupation of North America, and think about all these things. And when we draw attention to these sites or use them for tourism promotion, which gets under my skin, it leads to their destruction. And we don't have them figured out yet. And so I'm hopeful that we would maybe put more money into like imaging the sites and using advanced imaging to maybe, I read an article in Scandinavia, they have looked at rock art sites and they've applied artificial intelligence to the interpretation of them. And they've been able to draw in things that people didn't connect before. When we go to Sings Canyon this afternoon, you're going to see that most of the damage to the rock sites are caused by the deteriorating rock themselves. It's just happening before your eyes. The crystals come out of the rock and they destroy it. And so the race I don't think is to put fences up around it. I think the race is to document and to try to understand the site and its context now. And that is the real emergency about this. Just more in context, Todd Gunther from Central Wyoming College, he's done graduate level work with his students at Central Wyoming College to document the human occupation of the Dinwiddie area. And over winter, people lived there all winter long in the high altitudes. Sings Canyon was also a corridor, also a connection. We don't quite understand its significance, but it was. Where you're going to stand this afternoon, woolly mammoths walk right by you coming out of the canyon. That's where it is going to be astounding. But I see the race, and we do need more protection. We need people that are out there that look at these things to understand that they're important and they're connected. And that's where they're going to respect them. And so if we need better laws for that, you bet. But if we put a fence around them or put them in a guide deal, we are going to ruin them, because a fence only draws attention to them, and people, I think education and documentation is our best things that we could possibly do. Stronger laws, if we could, maybe actually codify it, and it'll draw attention that the Wyoming legislature, the people of Wind River, want to protect these areas. And we want them to be around as long as they possibly can. I'm sorry, I went overboard, but there's this National Geographic article. It is so so wow. It's called Storied Rock. It's all about rock art in North America. And it's the one that talks about the white sands footprints that have pushed, Clovis used to be the end. We used to think there's nothing older in North America than Clovis, blah, 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 blah. But people on the reservation have told us we're much older than Clovis. I've heard many of you say that. Well, these footprints are 22 to 23,000 years old. And that may not be the end of it. The land was connected to Asia. People walked here. Anyway, this is overwhelming. I really love that you're taking this up, and I thank you for doing it. This stuff is so precious.
Thank you, Senator Case. That's a good lead in for further testimony. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would like to talk a little bit about what we do within state parks and historic site lands, as well as some of our archaeological sites. I think we probably have the best rules that are out there for protection of those and within our rules and regulations. It's very specifically brought out. It's a long paragraph, but it talks about the destruction, injury, defacement, removal, or disturbance. And then it lists a bunch of things from buildings to signs to rock or mineral formation, artifacts, relics, historic or prehistoric features is prohibited without prior permission of the superintendent. And that permission piece, it talks about plants and other things. So sometimes we'll allow some folks to come in and pick some plants and do some things. So I think we have it within state parks, and really the way we look at it is a three-pronged perspective, which is education, enforcement, and security. We do put in some of our larger sites, where we have very high visitation, such as Legend Rock or Medicine Lodge archaeological site, we do have a buck and rail fence that's either in front, or we're actually putting one up at Legend Rock this summer. It kind of fits in, but it just is something that somebody has to crawl over to do that. We also have put in some new signage about 2016, 2017. Gives a statute, tells you what the misdemeanor is, says you're going to be fined a lot of money, up to 6 months in jail, and you're also on camera. And a lot of our places, we do have cameras set up. And again, it's mostly our highly visited sites. So preventatively, we use signage, fencing, educational materials, and in some cases, the cameras. And so I think within state parks, we do okay. And we also have staff that live there. So it's probably not a spot that's potentially going to be as defaced as some of these more remote spots or less remote spots. And I, as well as you, Madam Chairwoman Ellis, it's one of my things, right? I like to go out and do this. And what I find is in the backcountry, you have to get out and walk an hour, hour and a half. Those you don't seem to find defaced quite as, this is all personal opinion from experience, defaced quite as much. The very front country, such as Medicine Lodge or Legend Rock, aren't defaced as much just due to visitation and other things. But there's that medium in between where you can drive 10 miles out of town and still be able to stick your rifle out the window and do what you want to do. And so I think those are the spots that probably need to be focused on. And I would just reiterate what Senator Case said. I mean, 24% have been vandalized. That's a quarter of the history of the culture that we potentially don't have. And I would throw out one last thing to your point, Senator Case. That's one thing we've been starting to look at is figure out how to do those scans. We're actually trying to get some grant money for Sinks itself to start with, to kind of, because you can sometimes see other things that you can't see on the rock, like you were saying. So we're really hoping to kind of get that data input so we don't lose that in case it is vandalized.
Follow up, Senator Case, go ahead.
So, Mr. Director, it's good to see you. I went with Kyle Bernice to tour some art just about 10 days ago, and we were, he's been back and forth with me about seeking some funds, and I think Kyle talked to one of you gentlemen about maybe some imaging, and there's a group in the audience, it's called Sinks Canyon Wild, who you probably all know about. But anyway, they're going to consider putting some money towards your effort as a donation towards this imaging effort. This artificial intelligence thing is out of this world. I don't know if you've read, in Scandinavia, it connects things that nobody had ever connected before because there's been different things happen over time that have changed the context of when it was originally there. And so it puts it back to where it was when they made it. It's being used for lots of different things, including written works on papyrus and things, including some very famous scrolls from Herculaneum, but it's works for rock art. It's very expensive. But it is a possibility that we could save this stuff digitally before we lose it forever, either through vandalism or natural erosion, which is kind of the most disappointing. You're going to see stuff in Kings Canyon that you just say, wow, I wish I would have saw this when it was really spectacular. And it's not vandalism. It is in some instances, but I'll shut up. I got to shut up. I got to sit on my hands. It's bad.
Senator Case is very passionate about the topic, and that's a good thing. Go ahead, Director.
Madam Chairwoman, if there's one more thing I could add, Co-Chair Senator Ellis had reached out to me and said, is there any funding out there available to protect these types of things? And we kind of looked at our funding sources within State Parks and Cultural Resources, some of our pass-through grants and some of our grants. We do believe, if a nonprofit group came to us and said, we would like to put a fence, a buck and rail fence or some educational materials around this place, there's a potential for a Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund grant to be able to do that. And then also Senator Ellis, you had talked about the opportunity maybe through the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. And we've talked round and round in that. And part of that is the board hasn't been created yet. So we don't know exactly how that would look or how it would fit. But there may be an opportunity if a trail was being created to view those, that part of that expense could be to put up a buck and rail fence or put up some signage to protect that as well.
Follow up to that question, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, follow up.
For purposes of the discussion, I'm asking you a question I already know the answer to. When that fund is up and running, will funds be available for either one tribe or both tribes to apply for jointly?
Director?
Madam Chair and Chairwoman and Madam Co-Chairwoman, yes.
So just to hit, so tribes are eligible to apply for funding to protect their sites. Okay, just want to make sure that was clear.
I appreciate that, Senator Ellis, and that's why we're and that's why we're having this discussion, though, so we can make sure that everybody's aware of what's out there. What an interesting discussion, because just trying to even figure out, so what's the right route, the balance. I mean, do you do nothing? Is it, or like on one hand, don't do anything, other protect and all hands on deck, and what's the appropriate way to best get to the end goal. So again, I appreciate the discussion. I'm really excited about Senator Case's knowledge and interest in this subject. We'll have some good discussions this afternoon as well. Anything further? It looks like maybe you would like to say something. Mr. Pelton, is it Doctor or Mr. Archaeologist?
Just archaeologist. Madam Chairwoman, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate Senator Case's point that really documentation is our single best first step in this, I think. Right now, we have decent information on these sites, but it's incomplete. It's not documented in consistent ways. And so placing a huge emphasis on just a several year process of returning to every site of these that we know about to document them thoroughly and document incidents of vandalism will then make it very clear which sites need protection, which sites are in a sustainable position, which sites don't need that kind of thing. So I think if the documentation is really, in my mind, the clearest first step in identifying which of these sites need to have a little more TLC devoted to them.
And is that currently, one of the focuses of your office then?
Madam Chairwoman, we have done 2 since I've been in this job. Takes several days to document these. It's not really been a frontline priority of what we do because we're invested in a lot of things. That's not to say it couldn't be, but I think actually the task is much larger than say our office could undertake alone. It would have to be kind of a larger effort.
Great, thank you. Go ahead. It looks like Mr. Beatles.
Yeah, and I just want to add a little bit more context on how we do identification or how identification of sites is done in general. You know, the way that we know about most of these sites is through Section 106 activities, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So that states that if there's a project that receives federal funding or a federal permit, there has to be a review of how it affects cultural resources. So the majority of sites that are known throughout the state are a result of development on federal lands, quite frankly. So, you know, we do maintain a database with all that information. And if you look at the map of that database, as one of my archaeologists likes to say, it's basically a map of energy development within the state. So there are like large pockets of the state that we just don't have information on, areas where we have an amazing amount of information on based on that development. So a lot of these sites that we know of because of that kind of development and that kind of use that's on those lands. So there is, you know, more work that could be done on identification outside of that framework, just to kind of learn about new sites also. But we're also limited on land ownership when it comes to some of that identification. And so though, yeah, those sites that we know of that we are coming into our database are coming in through our federal partners through the 106 Act.
Thank you, Director. Further, go ahead, Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question for Director Glenn. It's a question only a lawyer can love. And you earlier in your testimony, you were quoting from a regulation. Do you have a citation to that regulation?
Madam Chairman, Representative Chestic, it's a Wyoming Parks Rules and Regulations.
Okay, all right. So that my follow-up is that it just applies to state parks and not other lands.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Chestic, yes, state parks, historic sites, and state archaeological sites.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Chestic.
Is it intended to implement Section Wyoming Statute 36-1-114? 36-1-114 gives creates an opportunity to do some rulemaking. Is that regular park right rule intended to implement that statute, or is it from some other source of authority?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Chestic, I would believe, and I do not know that answer, but I would believe it's other pieces of authority. When we manage a park, whether it's on federal lands, whether it's on game and fish lands, or whether it's our own lands, we have the authority to create regulations and rules to manage those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe just to step out of it a little bit more. You know, I spend a lot of time in the Southwest, and like rock art and cultural sites are just different, but I can't articulate like what makes Wyoming kind of special, and I'm unique certainly. But you talked about the 1,000 rock art sites. I'm guessing like similar people, like Utah's story is probably similar to ours, but then it starts kind of evolving. Like, can you give us just like an overview or just an understanding of why these are why they're unique, like the unique peoples that were maybe here, unique things that maybe are drawn? I mean, I don't know the answer. I literally just don't know the answer to these questions. So is there something that you can say that makes Wyoming consistent with maybe the region, or why is it special?
And any of you gentlemen that want to take
If you know.
go ahead.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Ellis, I'm happy to brag about Wyoming archaeology. It's what I do. I think what sets Wyoming's archaeological record apart is, in terms of the rock art at least, is right here. The Dinwoodie tradition is internationally known as one of the more interesting and sort of enigmatic rock art traditions that exists, and it only exists within Wyoming, within the Bighorn River Basin and the headwaters of the Wind River. So I think to start out with that rock art tradition, it's really well represented in Dinwoodie Canyon and Legend Rock and other places. It really sets our record of rock art apart from rock art in the Southwest or other places in North America. I think beyond that, the rock art in the Southwest United States it's very much its own thing. But the plains, the northern plains, has a very distinct tradition in and of itself, and that tradition is represented really well within Wyoming. Things like we call like shield-bearing warriors that I referred to earlier, all these dramatic hunting scenes that show up. Those things just don't show up as much in Southwest or in California in the Great Basin. So yeah, I think I guess and the main point is that Wyoming has a lot of rock. It's got the canvas that in order to create rock art that a lot of other states don't, and that rock oftentimes preserves this rock art tradition really well. It's also very dry, so when rock art's painted, it doesn't degrade quite as quickly. It's kind of a confluence of factors of a really interesting cultural landscape converging with the right preservation conditions and the right media to create this art. I think that's what really sets it apart from other regions of the country.
Thank you, Mr. Pelton. Any follow-up? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, and I think Senator Case is articulating the balance and the struggle well. You know, as I mentioned, I like to visit these sites. I wish I knew where more of them were. I would love to take my children and go for an hour-long hike in the backwoods, but I don't know where all these sites are. So can you just talk to us, like in your position, and you've thought about these issues a lot, like how we are achieving that balance of allowing interested people who want to go visit these sites knowledge and access to be able to do that, but also recognizing the more that we put information out there, the more we're creating opportunities for vandals to also visit these sites and cause damage.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Ellis, I think we're doing okay, and I'll echo what Director Glenn said, and it really is those kind of mid-range sites that are most impacted. I think that we're really fortunate to have several of our most significant rock art sites open for public interpretation, and those sites don't really get vandalized. When you have sites that have trails to them, that have signs up, that have cameras, people just don't mess with those. And I'm talking specifically about like Legend Rock, Medicine Lodge Creek. The BLM interprets several of their rock art sites, like the White Mountain Petroglyph site. I think it's done really well in their interpretation. Castle Gardens, another great example. I think those should be the models of what we're aiming to achieve. And so maybe if we can pull some of those kind of mid-range sites that are kind of in the middle of nowhere, but not completely in the backcountry, if we can pull some of those into publicly interpreted sites, my suspicion is that they're not going to be vandalized as much as they are now. I don't think there's good information on how that works quite yet, on the trade-offs between public interpretation and preservation, but my hunch is that more visibility is actually a good thing for these, because people feel like they can't get away with it as well.
Go ahead.
Another question. I know we're not prosecuting these matters because it's difficult to put all the information together, but I'm trying to think of who is, who's doing the vandalism. And do you have just kind of a gut, what your sense is of who these people are? I mean, is it young people who are out there? Is it, I'm just trying to get a sense of who you think we should be targeting more of our education efforts on.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Ellis, I actually pulled together a really nerdy graph about that in the report again. So my impression is
it in
the scatter plot. So my impression is that just looking from, say, the dates, for instance, on rock art at this Pine Canyon site we documented last summer, if you array the dates against the population of Rock Springs, they're related. And so my takeaway from that is there's always a small subset of Wyoming's population that's going to do this. Anybody that's worked in law enforcement or in the judicial system knows there's always going to be somebody that does something wrong. I think it's that phenomenon. My hunch is that it's not that many. It's like 1 in 1,000, maybe 1 in a couple thousand people. My hunch is that I actually described it in one of my pieces of writing on this as a bush-fueled desert romp on a dirt bike. I think it's kind of that set. They like to go out in the desert, and I completely understand. It's very fun. Go out in the desert, drink a bunch of beer, ride four-wheelers, and have a good time out in the middle of nowhere. My hunch is it's that kind of that demographic, rather than kind of like teenagers having a good time.
Madam Chair, just a follow-up comment. I read your material. I was just teeing it up for you. to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about.
To talk about the beer fueled something bush romp or something. Further questions for these gentlemen? All right. Thank you so much for your time, for your effort. And of course, we'll be getting more information from you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, so tribal lands, is there either representatives from the Tribal Historic Preservation Office and or just general public comment in regards to this topic? Is there anybody online? All right, going once, oh, I'm going, took it on twice. Good morning again, Councilwoman. If you'll go ahead, just briefly introduce yourself and then proceed with testimony.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Chase for the record, and I apologize for our THPO representatives not being here. We just had a changeover in administration, and I'm not sure if the new director received the notification to be here. And so I would like to talk on their behalf. I believe that I'm not sure where this is going or where this conversation is going, but I truly believe that the state can help with harsher punishment for those that do the vandalism on the state side, on the BLM lands that that are included on in our reservation boundaries. But also we're going through the SALOC, the Shoshone and Arapaho Law and Order Code, and so we are recommending the same on our side for to be added to the, you know, for harsher punishment. And I was hoping that you guys would go to Dinwiddie so that you could see the difference between our Dinwiddie rock art and what you'll see today at Sinks Canyon, because there is a very dramatic difference. They do have fences up around there now, but there has been a lot of vandalism throughout the years, and our Port Fish and Game Office, they are low in numbers. It seems like Art's been a one-man show for many years, and now he finally has, he's bringing on more people, but we do need more game wardens on our reservation, and I guess that's a problem that the councils have to deal with and fix. The ancient rock art, we know that they were made by the ancient peoples and the people of the past. And someplace there is a turtle, and that's what you know, we say that's from our former people. And so we know that we've been here for many years, way longer than what science has determined. And I believe that every year scientists uncover new information that keeps reshaping our history, you know, through the carbon dating and whatnot. And like I stated, we don't know who our predecessors were. They may not have been from the Shoshone and Arapaho tribes. They may have been from other tribes. And we don't really know how old they are. We cannot really interpret them, but we do know that a guy that used to work with our elders many years ago from the state side, he went down to the southern end part of the earth and discovered and realized that there's the same type of rock art down there. And our stories say that our oral histories say that we've been everywhere. And we know and understand places that we've been all over. We used to live where land floated on water, and that's the Florida area. We also tell about a time when we lived where there were rocky cliffs, and that's the eastern slopes. Our language is Algonquin, and we're the furthest westward tribe that speaks the Algonquin language. All the other Algonquin languages are on the East Coast. We also have history that tell oral stories that tell us about a time where we lived where everything was white, where all the animals were white. And we lived up north where the glaciers were. We also have stories that tell about how when we went down south, way south, where men had tails, we saw the monkeys. And we tell about our time down in Mexico, and we tell about our time up through Canada, and we have two blood tribes that speak our language, as well as the Gilbert tribe and our people of Oklahoma, our Southern Arapaho relatives. And so these stories confirm that we have been everywhere. And these stories say, in our stories, they estimate that it was over a span of 100,000 years. And so I think scientific, archaeological, and anthropological findings will confirm our oral history someday, because a lot has been confirmed already. And I think it's really important to know and understand these things, but there are several rock art places, we call them petroglyphs. Don't know when it started to be called rock art, but that's okay. We believe that anonymity is the best protection of these places. And you know, we know about Legend Rock, about being about 5 miles from Arapaho Ranch, and we know that that's been studied a lot, but there still hasn't been any interpretation. And we do have stewardship within the exterior boundaries of our reservation, but we may need financial assistance. You know, if we were to find these funding sources and make the right partnerships with state and federal officials, then I think that would help us in protecting these sites. I think that not only have signage to warn them of punishment if they deface any of them, but also educational signage too, so that they can know and understand more, and they'll be less willing to deface the rock art. And so another thing I just wanted to mention, I work with our elders of the tribe, and I have since 2004, and so I hear a lot of things. And one story that was really amazing to me is the story that was told about some people doing some work over by Laramie, and they were digging the side of a cliff, and a skeleton fell out. And the state representatives didn't do anything for many years because they didn't know what to do. And finally, they called all the tribes in the region together to ask them about the skeleton that they found. And they said, who among your tribes uses red ochre paint? And the only tribes that raised their hand was the Arapaho and the Cheyenne tribe. And that skeleton had red ochre paint on it, and it was determined to be way older than the oldest man discovered so far. And so that's really interesting. And I just wanted to say that much. And I apologize for our HIPPO representatives not being here, but I explained why. And then maybe if they can, well, I know that they do work with the SHPO office quite diligently on all other matters around the state. And so I think making this kind of connection will do us good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Appreciate that. And we will continue to reach out and make that connection. And then you mentioned Dinwiddie. I did specifically ask about that. Again, communication just didn't quite get there in time. This came up pretty quick, being May 1st, practically an April meeting. So we'll have time and have that discussion. If we can make that happen, if all the pieces are in place, I would like to do that as well. So questions for the councilwoman? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just to reiterate, this meeting came up quick, and LSO has been amazing in trying to put our agenda together. And to the extent that I wasn't sure about the TIPO, if we got the right points of context on there. So to the extent that we made an error, LSO was working hard on it. My co-chair and I signed off on all of it. So our apologies to you if we didn't quite get this all put together right, but it just came up fast.
Any further questions for Councilwoman Chase before we go on? Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman.
I was here to support Councilwoman Chase on what she had to say, but I would like to add that one of the things we were looking at the statute and we agree with some of it. We would like to have some edits in there and maybe some addition to it. But one of the things that we stand by is that we do not want our sacred sites here on a map for the public, maybe for yourselves, that kind of work, but for the public. No, we're looking at a lot of defacing out here, so
Yeah.
just wanted to state
Yeah,
that for the
that's a-
record.
and that's a good part of this whole conversation, right? And that's is, like I say, you could go anywhere from taking an approach of, putting fences around and advertising anywhere to completely leave it alone. So it's good conversation to have.
Mhm.
So thank you, Councilwomen. Go ahead, Co-Chairwoman Ellis.
Madam Co-Chair, as I've been thinking about this issue and just the resources you have on your reservation, you talk about anonymity being the best protective method. I'm guessing it also works in your favor that people are maybe nervous to trespass on tribal land in a way that maybe they're not so nervous to trespass in other areas. Do you think, can you talk to me a little bit if that's maybe an accurate observation, or do you think that there's
It depends.
an impermissible amount of trespass?
Mhm.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
It's the access that's to that site. What we've seen over on the mountain at Thermopolis, where we have our radio station equipment, there's a lot of vandalism going on there. That's why we don't have our radio station anymore. A large part of our equipment was vandalized. It was like $300,000. So we're still working on collecting money on that. And we were approached by the state to make that road easier for people to go up, but we told them, no, leave it as it is, because when we did give better access to that road, we had a lot of the young kids over there going over there and partying on that mountain. So maybe part of it is just kids looking for a place to go, maybe to do things. I don't know, but that's what we were facing there. And so that's why we're saying we'd like to just leave them alone. I mean, we can mark them, but for the public, we don't really want that. There are sites to us where we do, when we go, we have ceremonies, those type of things there. So just wanted to bring that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Harjo. Further questions? Senator Case.
Well, just the comment that it'd be very arrogant if the state of Wyoming put tribal resources on a map without your permission, and we will fight that all the way.
Okay, thank you. And I brought that forward because we're talking about federal land.
Yeah,
So that's why I wanted. to
understand.
Mhm. Thank you.
We need to be very sensitive about that and consult.
Mhm.
Sure.
Thank
And
you.
that's, again, part of this, I think, again, broader discussion. And as we know, always, in all sorts of different issues, but there's like 4 different, there's different jurisdictions, there's different type of land, like you said, federal land, BLM, Forest Service, tribal, state lands, all of the things. So it's always keeping a lot of interests, yes, and
And maybe suggest one big meeting where we're all in attendance. That might be,
Right.
we might be able to get stuff done faster in that
yeah, that
process.
sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Further comments from you or comments or questions from the committee? Great. Thank you. Did you want, I'm sorry. I thought you were waving, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Co-Chair. I just wanted to leave you with, the thought that Christianity says that our commandments are written in stone, and we believe that so is our history, and they're worth protecting. Thank you.
That's a great thought to end on. Thank you. I believe that that ends. Any further public comment on this? Okay.
Is there any opportunity for general public comment? I don't know that anybody would want to, but we used to do that at the end of
That's-
each meeting.
I mean, I feel like that's what I called for, but
Oh, I thought you meant specifically on that issue.
so close that topic. Well, first of all, I wanted to discuss if is there anything further on this issue that we want to do or discuss?
Is from the attorneys on this committee, which has more attorneys than the Judiciary Committee does, which is great. Is there a reason to codify or put this in another place? And maybe it doesn't achieve much other than drawing attention of the public to the process and the fact that it is a crime. And I'm just asking.
Thank you, Senator Case. I'll just say off the top of this is just a knee jerk. I don't see any benefit gained from from it moving to a different title. We've heard that there's not even been prosecutions. I think that it's there. We can certainly look at these statutes if we think there's any updating it, but I also think that, I mean, the direction that we heard, the experts that we heard from, this is kind of, it's in their realm. And so I think it's probably appropriately placed. But if we wanted to do, like I said, having statutes, regulations, misdemeanors encapsulated that under like an administration is not atypical. So I don't think it's in the wrong place in the statutes. At least that's my thought. I'd take any sort as far as being, was it Title 36? If we wanted, my thought is if we wanted to discuss if there's any sort of cleanup that would be helpful for the administration, certainly to discuss that. As far as a big title change, I don't see any benefit. That's my thought.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
to respond to that as well, this is an area, I'm familiar with how Section 106 works on the National Historic Preservation Act and the steps, entities have to go through in order to get a project approved. That to me is clear. I think I still have a lot to learn on other things, and I just kind of want to reserve the right to think about this a little bit more and see if there is some tightening up or a new thought that we could introduce before our next hearing. Obviously, we don't have the luxury of time to have another meeting and then pick this up again. So I would just say, this is an issue that I would like to continue to study. If others who are listening or watching or in the room have an idea or suggestions of what we do with what's on the books right now, I still feel like I'm in a learning phase.
Yeah. Yes, Senator Ellis, I would agree. Go ahead, Representative Cheston.
As the third lawyer on the panel to weigh in on this, the problem that I see with the current statutory scheme is that Section 36.116 creates a penalty for violations of any of the provisions of this act. The only thing in the act that looks like a criminal that creates a crime is 36.1114, violation of these regulations, but the regulations have never been promulgated. So there's no prosecutable offense here because it's not been created by regulation. So I guess there's a gap there that I see just looking at it quickly here that we need to study and maybe if the agency has not promulgated regulations, maybe we need to, as a statutory fix, create the elements of the crime and amend this statute. I'm okay leaving it in Title 36, but I think maybe there's something there we could do to fill the gap of the fact that there is no regulation and therefore no crime has really been defined by the statute yet.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along those lines, I'm just trying to think of, how it's working out there right now. And if you have who's out there patrolling, limited state parks personnel. But we talked about game and fish. If they're out there in the universe and they see game and fish violations, they act on them. So maybe we need to have a conversation with game and fish to say, what happens if you were to see something like this while you're out patrolling and in the field? Is there a way to loop them in to be able to enforce this or at least somehow refer? I'm just trying to think. They might not welcome. I'm guessing they might not welcome additional responsibility, but I just think there's a lot to. We've started kind of picking at this, and I think there's a lot more to think about.
Thank you, Chairwoman Ellis. I agree. I am certainly interested in sort of the enforcement aspect that we can discuss with state lands and certainly game and fish are busy. I don't know, again, first of all, the authority that they would have, but there's somebody that's in the field. I'm looking, so there is penalty section in 116 saying a person violating any provision of this act, and then looking at 14 and 15, it seems to only be before excavation or removal of any. So I think there could be some work on broadening and strengthening, and then just what you said, I certainly am interested in if there's an increase in enforcement that we could look at, even if it doesn't happen a lot, just so that we've got agencies that feel like they know that they would be ready to write a citation and they're in charge of investigation. So there's some good discussion there. Representative Chestic.
Yeah, and the reason I asked Director Glenn about the citation for the penalties that he was referring to for the Wyoming parks, apparently there is some regulation out there that doesn't relate to this statute, but it has other application. So it looks like there's kind of a mishmash of statutes that maybe can create a prosecutable crime, maybe not. It's really, I would like to have some more study of this, maybe have LSO weigh in on how do we clean this up? I mean, it looks like a mess to me. And I think there is advantage to having a crime on the books, whether it's prosecuted frequently or not. There will be cases where you will have people identified as the vandals, and you could, right now, I'm not sure we could prosecute them, but I'd like to be able to put something in the books that is a prosecutable offense, and I'm not sure how to do that, but maybe we can get some help from LSO on that.
Go ahead, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I grew up the son of an amateur archaeologist in the shadow of George Frizen, who was one of the premier archaeologists in the world. I guess in my youth, I thought that, and I still do. And what I think all this conversation has talked to is where there is a public land nexus. We actually have a lot of, half of Wyoming is fee land, private land, and there is no nexus for myself as a private landowner with a archaeological deposit on our lands to do anything besides trespass. When they are actually not just trespassing, they could be destroying something of significant cultural value. Whether it's, and I'm not an indigenous person, but I certainly grew up with I grew up in the Vorse site in Hyattville. I grew up in the Ruby site. I mean, that's where I grew up, in those places as a little kid in the dirt. Not in doing the real work, otherwise. But so anyway, so I say if we're gonna continue this discussion, let's actually think about the tools that myself as a private landowner with several sites on fee land would have to go after someone who did vandalize or otherwise destroy intentionally. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Go ahead, Senator Case.
Thank you. I recall a story in the news about a couple weeks ago, and you all may have seen it. A very big deal was made of some vandals at Lake Mead National Recreation Area. And they had pushed a rock off a cliff. You know, it wasn't particularly a balanced rock. It was just, you know, I've done this myself. Okay. In high school, I pushed rocks off cliff, watch them go. They did this. And the Park Services, they take this extremely serious, and they're looking for these people. I don't know if they've caught them yet, but they made such a huge deal about rocks that may or may not have cultural significance, and I'm weighing in way above my ignorance. But the things we're talking about have a lot of significance. They're not just pushing a rock off a cliff. This is a culture and history that we may not understand. And so I see that if we were to bring forth a bill, I'm worried about that if the bill fails and people think because it failed that they can do whatever they want. That's a problem. But I'm also worried that I also see an advantage or a benefit to having an education process to people in Wyoming, how important this stuff is. Because I think people mostly, when they deface things, I think they're doing dumb things and they don't think about it mostly. And if they just understood that you're erasing someone's history and that's important, maybe we would get some traction. It might be worth trying it. I want to go with the law professor on this one. I'll follow his lead.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Another just thought, because I was thinking about this too. I think Senator Barlow's right when he talks about a lot of these sites are probably located on private land. And you think about things like the Endangered Species Act and how, you know, when you just penalize things, it creates a reverse incentive for maybe a landowner to say, I saw this very unique code on my property. You know, I think I've heard people say, just don't tell anyone, kill the frog and move on because you don't want that trouble. So I think that I would like to have this conversation about what landowners' roles play in this. And I think landowners in Wyoming value these sites. I think they're important for the vast majority of like large landowners in Wyoming. So I just want to offer that, like, we want to be very thoughtful so that we don't create bad incentives. We want to create good incentives.
Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So to those, both those points, endangered species and historical archaeologicals. I have a family history in that 100 years, nothing compared to our indigenous peoples, 100 years. There are sites we don't speak about because we don't want them to be exposed to, for both reasons, both species reasons and historic artifacts.
Thank you. Further comments, further questions? Last chance at public comment. From LSO, is there anything?
Could we ask them to do some looking?
Yes, so we'll discuss what we do want to see done, and in preparation for our next meeting. So go ahead with your thoughts, Senator Case.
Well, I'm wondering if we could follow up on the good representative's suggestion, and I'm looking at you, Lily. You see a way forward through this, maybe that we could codify this, maybe look at what other states do. That's a good suggestion. What are your thoughts?
Go ahead, Ms. Sharp.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that we could probably do both. We can research what other states have done. We can work with state parks to ensure that if we create a bill draft, that it would be consistent with what state parks is already doing, especially since they've already have tried and tested language. And then so we could create a bill draft that would create a destruction that would basically update our statutes, that create a penalty for destruction of rock art. And then in addition to that, and would also look at other language used by other states and what other state laws there are out there. And then what we would need direction though is if you, I anticipate, or as I hear it, is that you would like if we did that, you would want the bill draft to address both private and state land, the sites on both private and state land. And we could also, if you want, actually do a memo on, again, other states that have those statutes that deal to both private and state land. And then the final thing is whether we would need direction as to whether or not you want us to do anything with respect to private landowner remedies for other than trespass. So those are all options that we can do.
Madam Chairwoman.
Let's go ahead and discuss that. Yes, Senator Case.
I see the private land issue as being pretty complicated. You know, there's potential takings kind of stuff, and I'm not opposed to looking at it, but I sort of think it has to be separate from the public land piece.
Can we get maybe a little more discussion as far as maybe if we were interested in discussing the private land, what is it that we would, what objective are we thinking? Senator Case, Senator Barlow, what?
I'm not sure myself, Madam Chairwoman. I'm thinking back to the previous bill we had in this committee about when you find archaeological remains on private land, it created an obligation there and a process. I'm trying to think if there's any relation to that. I mean, if it is private land, and I realize that there's a cultural vastness here when we're talking about someone owning land. I get that. But it's the way our laws are written. So if a private landowner wants to build a patio over the top of something of significance, right now, if there were human remains, we have a law about that. But we don't necessarily have a law about antiquities that I know of. And forgive me, but I'm not sure we would necessarily want that. I mean, private landowners should appreciate that in and of themselves, like, and we start imposing the state on that, that's problematic.
Mhm. So Senator Barlow, any further thoughts on that? I mean, is there something that we're interested in pursuing here or not?
Madam Chairman, I guess I just wanted to point out there's some interesting intersections here,
Mhm.
meaning a lot of the historic sites that we know of and do a lot with that are not commercialized are often on public lands.
And they're best protected.
And they're very well protected. You can look in Northeast Wyoming, there's a lot of paleontologic, which this, by the way, the definition in this 36 includes paleontologic as well. There are private paleontologic excavations and sites in Northeast Wyoming that get a lot of commercialization, which is fine. It's a private property right in that sense, etc. I would point out though that the criminal trespass code, which I'm not gonna, I have experts here, I'm not an expert, but as a landowner, as a landowner that I can post my land or I can warn somebody, that's the part of the code, right? You have to give somebody fair warning. You can post yellow trespass signs. They go trespass anyway. They drove by 5 signs and they make the case they didn't know, but they go to a specific site to do something very specific. I don't have any additional redress. And destroy something. If it was personal property, if it was a fence or an animal or something, then I have a value to that. I may be able to, that's part of it. But if it's something that is, has value beyond personal property, then how do you understand that? And I'm not suggesting that this committee needs to take that up. I'm just suggesting that it's real in very remote parts of Wyoming, which that people go do things that are,
So can
we don't have.
Can I ask a question about this?
Go ahead, Senator.
Is it possible to draft a law that says that any person destroying sites on public land or private land face the consequences of the bill we're talking about? But has that the private landowner themselves can do things on their own land. I mean, it sort of carves them out. But it does allow for the prosecution of the third party that comes onto the private land with the same set of penalties that would happen if it was defaced on public land. Is that
Yeah.
a possible carve out? Am I making any sense?
Yes, Senator Case, in fact, it's possible, quite honestly, if we have the discussion, we could tighten it up, but that it's already there in that the statute says destroying property of another. Now, so the argument could be made that it's already there, that it was not the person who destroyed it was not their property, so it was of another. So, I mean, we could certainly make a subsection or something and make that stronger if we wanted. But it's possible that already exists with property destruction. Just a thought. I know Senator Barlow, you were.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So just what's currently in statute for the state lands, state and federal lands, which I think it's kind of interesting that federal lands are included in that. Let's just be honest about that.
Well, we're gonna take them back.
Okay, well, but they both anticipate that things could happen. One is before any excavation and the other is before removal. So they're anticipating that the landowner would have some ability to authorize this, period. And this happens to be in the context of state lands or federal lands. I don't know why you can't anticipate the same thing from a fee landowner. Anyway, I just throw it out there. And it seems to me like the desert Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, Pueblos, there would be some really good places that some of this law has probably been tested and done. I'll leave it to the good chairman to speak to that, but it seems like I've had the honor to tour some of those sites, and it seems like they're quite valued. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Madam Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
And thanks. I think maybe we keep working on this topic. We'll visit with Office of State Lands, but also, talking about just the education piece of it, if it's really people out there on 4-wheelers out and about recreating, is there a way to really kind of micro target when you're getting your whatever decal or permission to go out? Could we bolster just education there? Can we bolster it with hunters that are out in the field? I mean, just I would just want to maybe see if we could do more to bolster some education out there about why these sites are important. People should degrade them. And then on your point about all of, I think there's a lot to unpack. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm just gonna not open that can of worms right now. But I think we're on the right path of having some good conversations. All of this is to say, we want to do this work. You can see we're sorting through it. We're spitballing right now. This is how lawmaking is done in Wyoming, which I think is a wonderful process. But we're not, we know that the key to all of this is our tribal involvement with our tribal partners. So please, relay involvement from the historic preservation offices. We only know so much. We'll visit with our state experts, but we value that input too. And it doesn't work without it. So I just want to make it clear, this is an open invitation. Like, we need to think about all this, but we know we need help.
Senator Barlow.
So, Madam Chairman, maybe we go back to the very beginning. A state archaeologist said, one of the most important things to do is actually document, actually preserve some kind of digital record or whatever record. So part of what we maybe should do is also think about, if we do something legislative, is bring forth some legislation to have some funding or some whatever to support the preservation office, et cetera, and a grant program, even that maybe fee landowners that happen to have a very unique site could say, I want this documented as well, because of not maybe the ravages of teenagers, but the ravages of time and erosion, et cetera, et cetera. So I think let's not lose sight. That comes higher priority probably than the trespass thing for me. Is let's give some resources to do some of this. So in that vein, Madam Chairman, is it appropriate to maybe ask those offices that have that charge or potential charge to give us some idea what it would take? We did that with the cold case database. We said, what is it going to take to get something started? $150,000 we went with in the last budget, right? Or a bill. Maybe that is our first obvious step. And if we get to the AI thing, we'll send that over to the blockchain committee.
I appreciate that, Senator Barlow. That's when I was listening to the testimony, that's kind of where my mind went to, which is, if there really are, if we've only documented 2, I'm not being, and we need to be rounding out that program and saying we prioritize it. Well, we all know that how you prioritize things, you got to put some resources and some bodies and some minds on it. So that maybe that was one of the directions we go with this. So I guess I would agree with that, Senator.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just to move forward, I think it might be appropriate for us to try and find a time with LSO. We'll send maybe a little small working group meeting. We'll invite all legislators, maybe shoot for the 1st of August or after the election, maybe right after the election, where we could just all get on a Zoom call, touch base with state parks. Maybe we do some outreach to Game and Fish in between now and then, the state archaeologists, everybody set up a meeting, and then we can kind of flesh through a little bit more of a plan. That way we'll have maybe a bill draft that we could anticipate for our final meeting. Does that sound like something we should, a good path forward?
I appreciate that. And I'm guessing LSO might appreciate that, because I know that we're kind of all over the place, and I'm not sure exactly what we're asking. So I think maybe some further discussion and work. So, because I hate to have you guys going and writing 20-page memos that we don't use. So, and I appreciate it because you do it. I know you do it. But I think that's a good action item, action plan.
And then, Madam Chair, along those lines, we'll reach out to our tribes as well. There'll be a working session is how I'm viewing, just like a Zoom call where we spend maybe an hour or two just coming up with some ideas, then giving LSO direction on, we want a bill draft that says this, we want a bill draft that says that. And then then we'll have bills that we could look at our final meeting.
And be significantly more refined. Like, again, if we're not going to pursue this private land, for example, then we won't be doing a ton of research that's just going to go on the cutting room floor, or maybe, or maybe we will, but I do think maybe we need to have further discussions before we are sending you guys down paths. Okay. So I don't think I did it before, but I'll officially close public comment. And then I think we've also done our working. I don't think there's anything more we need to do on this topic. I think we need to, and I guess I'm gonna take some direction from my co-chair and from LSO. So it says recess for lunch, and I know we're going to have we're going to go tour, but do we just actually close the meeting for the day or just say recess? Go ahead.
I don't see any, whatever you call it. I do think you should let people have any general public comment that might be
Further
unrelated.
comment?
Yeah, but might be unrelated to any specific issue.
Just any,
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, I think that's management council's guideline, and then we adjourn for the day to reconvene with the tour group, but come back in the morning.
Okay, sounds good. So, any further comment about not only that last issue, but anything else that we've discussed today? Any general comment? Okay, so, with that, we will recess for lunch and then I guess adjourn for the day, and we will be back at, are we 8:30 again in the morning? We'll be back at 8:30 in the morning.
Excellent.